indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. If there's no objections, the agenda will stand approved as written. Next item on the agenda. It's really a distinct honor. We have the recognition of the outgoing president of Bastyr University. And we're really pleased to recognize Harlan Patterson's significant contribution to Bastyr University and to the Kenmore community. Bastyr University, a major natural health educational and research university, is Kenmore's largest employee, and President Patterson, who announced his plan several months ago.
Your fucking video.
Excuse me. President Patterson, who announced his plan several months ago, is concluding his term as president this month. He served on Bastyr University board beginning in 2011 and was asked to assume the role of interim president in 2017 and was later chosen as university president in April of 2018. His leadership, in the words of his colleagues, provided stability and foundation that allowed the university to thrive. He has helped Bastyr through the university's campus and clinic locations in Kenmore, Seattle, and San Diego, and provide exceptional educational opportunities that integrate health, science, and nature, helping to create a healthier communities for all. And we're really pleased to present you with this plaque, and I will personally deliver it to your office tomorrow. And thank you, President Patterson. Thank you very much. And if you would, please say a few words.
Well, thank you very much, Mayor and members of the council, and Rob. I really appreciate this recognition. I think the relationship with universities and their cities are always interesting and subjects of a lot of academic discussion and town and gown relationships. I would say that ours is one of those ones that you would put up and say as a model of good relationships and good engagement. It has been wonderful working with the various outfits or the various offices within the city, working with the leadership. It's just been great. We really do appreciate where we're at. We have our 3 locations, but don't tell this to everybody, although you're recording it, but you know, Kenmore still kind of is home. And we look at it that way, and it's a fabulous partnership that we have, and we just love being here. And we're super excited, I think in some ways like everybody, but we made it through perhaps the most challenging year and a half of the existence of the university. And we are looking to be pretty much fully back in place in person when we begin fall quarter in September. So we're really excited to be back together, and I can't wait to go up the new and improved Juanita Drive Boulevard as we head to campus in the fall. So really excited. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure knowing you and working with you, and I know that the new president, Devin Bird, will enjoy working with you every bit as much.
Well, we look forward to working with him, and President Patterson, we certainly have enjoyed working with you. Thank you so very much. And we now have the honor of introducing Stephanie Lucash. She's a limited term ARPA Administrative Assistant and Assistant City Manager. Mr. Carlindsey.
Thank you, Your Honor, and City Council. Yeah, with the passage of the American Rescue Plan Act, we have our work cut out for us. We have $6.4 million of direct funding to the city of Kenmore that we need to administer, plus all the other ARPA funding sources that are out there and the intergovernmental work that's going to be needed. And so we are very fortunate to be able to have Stephanie Lucash join our team to help us figure this all out and get that money out to our community. It's going to be a big job. It's going to be complicated. but I believe we have the right person for this job. Stephanie comes to us from the city of Seattle, where she was the director of citywide HR planning and innovation. And before that, she worked for King County Department of Executive Services, where she was in charge of streamlining processes in various King County departments. She's a green belt in Lean Six Sigma, and she's also been an assistant city manager before for the city of Covington. She has a 30-year career in local government. And like I said, I'm just excited to have her join our team to help us with this big effort. Mayor, is it okay if Stephanie says a few words?
Oh, please.
Thank you so much, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. I'm really looking forward to working with you and the city of Kenmore as we implement our ARPA funds. It's just an amazing opportunity. To me, it's like a once in a lifetime opportunity to do something enduring, lasting, to benefit all in our community. And I'm also really pleased about the $1 million in direct cash assistance that you all agreed and voted to move forward with in May. So I'm looking forward to implementing all portions of this work and maximizing other funding opportunities too, to do some really amazing work for our city. And we'll be reaching out to our community and asking for their input as well as we proceed with this work in the coming months and years. So I'm just honored to be here to join the team. It's a real pleasure. Everybody's been so warm in my welcome already, and I appreciate my time with all of you so far and look forward to much more time together in the future working on this important effort.
Thank you. We are certainly looking forward to having you part of the team. I know you're going to enjoy everybody that works here. They're just a wonderful group of people, and we're certainly pleased to have you to be part of it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Next item on the agenda is public comments. We want to welcome our community members to the council's meeting. In this forum, the council cannot engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the council is to listen. All comments must be addressed to the mayor and city council, and please use the raise hand feature if you wish to speak. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you, and please state your name, city of residence for the record, and keep your comments to the allotted time. Your time cannot be granted to another, and your clock time will not be reset unless there are extenuating circumstances and the presiding officer has expressly allowed it. Screen sharing is not allowed, and you could submit your materials to the council or clerk in advance. This meeting is being recorded, and thank you for taking the time to express your comments. Madam Clerk, if you please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At this point, I see 3 hands raised. I'd like to take them in this order: Wendy, David Morton, and Chuck Gippy. Wendy, can you hear us? Wendy?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I can hear you. Are you ready for me?
Yes.
My name's Wendy Reynolds. I live in Kenmore, just off of Simons Road. And I wanted to talk tonight about the changes that have been made to Simons Road in the last couple of years. Today, I was made aware of a second kid being hit in the crosswalk on the way to Inglemoor High School. This is the second one in the since the revisions have been done. Also, the calming, whatever you guys call it, the traffic calming that you guys have done has just contributed to more road rage on Simons Road. I'm almost rear-ended every day when I come home. I have to turn onto 84th Avenue and the turn is way too tight. If you come out and look at the paint, you'll see that everybody's using the bike lane as a right turn lane because otherwise we're going to get rear-ended. Also, the new merge down by Kirkland is really dangerous. They need to make that a left turn only, or something's got to be done there before somebody gets hurt. But I know you guys passed some, I don't know what it's called, but you want no pedestrian, no bicycle accidents. And I am aware of at least 2 kids being hit in those crosswalks crossing to Inglemore High School. The one this week was going to a camp. The other one was when he was going to school. So that's all I wanted to say. And I hope that you will look at it and get these things fixed before somebody gets killed.
Thank you, Wendy. Mr. David Morton.
Good evening, council members. I'm David Morton. I live near Redmond. Over 500,000 workers are exposed to fumes from asphalt, a petroleum product used extensively in road paving. Health effects from exposure to asphalt fumes include headache, skin rash, sensitization, fatigue, reduced appetite, throat and eye irritation, cough, and skin cancer. Some safety practices need to be followed when storing, handling, and heating liquid asphalt products. First, it must be recognized that all asphalt products, when heated enough, are flammable. That means that if you heat any asphalt hot enough, whether it is a cutback or an asphalt cement, hazardous vapors will be produced. When these vapors are mixed in proper proportion with oxygen in the air and come in contact with a source of ignition, a flash fire can occur. The flash may be quite violent, and if enough vapors are present, a raging fire may develop. This type of fire can and has very badly burned and killed people. Many asphalt products are used at temperatures above their flash points. The flash point of an asphalt product is the temperature at which a source of ignition will cause the vapors produced to catch on fire. Medium curing cutback asphalts are commonly used at temperatures above their flash points, where flammable vapors are produced. Cadman may be using an asphalt cement at a temperature which is only 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit below its flash point. If that asphalt cement contains solvents and it gets overheated, flammable vapors may be produced. And if the vapors mix with oxygen and reach a source of ignition, a fire will develop. Because of the flammable nature of asphalt vapors, the quick, violent fires and explosions that resulted in damage to a Tacoma asphalt plant on October 11th, 2020, could also happen at the Cadman asphalt plant in Kenmore. Tacoma fire crews were called to the Gardner Fields asphalt plant around 4:30 a.m. Sunday, October 11th, after authorities received several reports of multiple explosions and fire at the facility. The Tacoma Fire Department said the supply line between several of the tanks containing cutback asphalt had failed. The burning asphalt put potentially dangerous chemicals in the air, and people living nearby said they were concerned that the thick black smoke may have been toxic. Is Kenmore prepared for a possible explosion and fire at its asphalt plant? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Chuck Gippy. Chuck Gippy.
Hello.
Hi, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Chuck Gippy, and I live in Kenmore, very close to Hotchawee Park, which is what I'd like to speak about. I believe the current plans for the park are a missed opportunity for creating a public place for people to experience the nature that's there and the diversity of the wildlife. There's turtles, otters, beavers, eagles, heron, osprey, and so much more. The project appears to be planned around the Kenmore Waterfront Activity Center. I'm sure that's a fine organization.
Mr. Gippy, you're muted.
Okay, did you hear any of what I said?
That's a fine organization.
Okay, that's a fine organization, but I'm convinced who's on their board had something to do with the plan. Just like who's on the board of the Kenmore Rowing Club had something to do with getting the $2 million boathouse built at Rhododendron Park. The $8 million plan for Hotchawee Park calls for a concrete parking area, a concrete plaza, concrete or asphalt trails, another boathouse and storage for canoes, kayaks, dragon boats, rowing sculls, and more. That's a lot of money spent to eliminate everything natural and devote the space to a private club, especially since there's already a place for residents to launch paddle boards, kayaks, and canoes. Kenmore claims to be a steward of the environment. Plans for this park show more of an interest in accommodating a private club. I would hope you would reconsider these plans. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pat O'Brien. Pat O'Brien. Pat O'Brien, can you hear us? One more time. Pat O'Brien, can you hear us? We're going to move on. Victoria Grayland.
Good evening, City Council members. I hope you're all doing well after our first climate event of 2021. I hope it's the last, quite frankly. I hope, I might have misread it, but I think our climate report from the city staff and Cascadia, the consultant, is saying that we are going to meet a 17% reduction in greenhouse gases, but our goal is 50% in King County. And I hope that, I hope I'm wrong about reading that, but I don't think I am. And I'd like you to consider that the people of Kenmore are very highly motivated to fix this problem to our best ability and to do it compassionately. And I have great faith in the city, the people of Kenmore. And I think we can do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. O'Brien.
Hello, Pat O'Brien here, Kenmore, Washington. Can you hear me? All right, great. First of all, I'd like to just simplify Dr. David Morton's comments. Basically, what he said is that we know from a previous citation that the Kenmore asphalt plant is using cutback, which means it has kerosene and diesel fuel added to it for the medium cure. That is to keep it in a liquefied format so it can be laid down and it will cure on site. The higher the temperature, the less of that ingredient you need. It is in that, and they've been cited for that. And there is a tank, at least one tank, full of that ingredient. And that ingredient is much more combustible than what their regulations say they should be using. They should be using performance grade asphalt binder, and they don't all the time. And it smells and it's a fire hazard. And on top of that, it is a much greater health hazard to the firefighters, not to mention the $1 billion worth of float planes next door with above ground storage of aviation fuel. And if you have any common sense among you, you will know that when they operate illegally, that they put that asset, their own asset, and then all neighboring assets at risk. And there has been virtually no oversight by the city of what they're using there. They don't inspect the tanks. They don't take the documents of what's being delivered there. And you, as the people ensuring our health and safety, have to make sure that when that place catches fire, that is not compounded by a lot of flammable fluids that are not licensed to be there. Cut back asphalt is not part of what they are allowed to use, but they use it all the time. So please spend some time and get to know what they're doing. find an expert. I'd take some of that money that that lady is going to divvy up, and I'd go down there and I'd do a study of the health effects of the asphalt plant and what the health effects are on the water next to it, and what a fire on the scale of the Tacoma fire and the difficulty they had in fighting that fire. What would that mean in Kenmore? And you guys have been advised in advance that illegal products are being used there. You have to do something. And I agree with everything everybody said before me. The park needs to be rescaled to a natural scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Mayor Baker, I see no additional hands raised.
Is there anybody else wishing to be heard for public comments? If not, thank you all for your comments. And we'll move to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 And motion stands approved unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the business agenda. And first item is to approve resolution 21-365, adopting the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. Mr. Vincente.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Will we be conducting the public hearing first?
Yeah, but usually you tell us a little bit about it.
Also, if you want me to give my presentation first, I can do that.
Yep.
All right, let me share my screen. Hold on just a second. Come on. There we go. All righty, so I will be talking about our 6-year transportation improvement plan program, specifically for the years 2022 to 2027. Before I get started on that, I want to give you a brief background. The Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, is a state requirement. It requires us to provide a TIP, but also to update it every year. The TIP must show how we propose to utilize our funding for transportation-related projects in the upcoming 6 years. The TIP also needs to be consistent with our current comprehensive plan. It needs to be updated each year. I do want to say that the TIP is a planning document, and unlike the capital improvement program, it's not fiscally restrained. We are allowed to amend and adjust as we see fit, but we're not held to the time frame or the dollar values assigned to it. It is strictly a planning document so that the state is aware of what we're looking to potentially do with our funding. The TIP is filed with the Washington State Secretary of Transportation right after approval. And then, of course, the public hearing is required prior to the approval. I'm sure you probably don't remember me giving this speech last year. We did not do an update last year with the pandemic and a few other things occurring. It was decided to not do one last year and to wait for this year to do another update. Since our last TIP, which was the 2020 to 2025, we are carrying over 8 projects. The SR 522 West B, that's from 61st to the western city limits, the West Sammamish River Bridge, the Juanita Ped Bike Project, the 68th Ped Bike Project, our pavement preservation program, our Sidewalk Gap ADA replacement program, the Lower Swamp Creek Bridge replacement project, and the Northeast Arrowhead Drive sidewalk project. Since our last TIP, 6 new projects were added: the 61st Avenue Northeast Sidewalk Replacement Project, the Burt Gilman Trail 175th Wayfinding Connectivity Project, the 192nd Street Sidewalks, The Northeast, 181st sidewalks from 61st to 65th. And then the 84th Avenue sidewalks, one project is 145th to 155th, and the other is 155th to Simons. The 4 projects that we removed were 2018 Local Road Safety Plan for signing and lighting. Those were removed because those projects will be completed before the 2022 period. And so any project that is where you're not spending any money has to be removed from the program. The SR 522 crossing study, that one was removed. And then the 73rd Avenue Northeast restriping and widening for bike lanes. That project is actually being combined with our current pavement preservation program. So we're going to be looking to do some bike striping along that corridor as part of that project. Within your packet, there are descriptions for the existing projects and the new projects if you for your reference. In general, this is kind of where the projects are located. I've got all 14 projects shown on the map. That's also in your packet. The solid lines, the more bolded lines, those are the projects that are currently active and have funding. The dotted lines are the projects that are proposed, but we have no secured funding for those at this time. They wind up in the tip because that is one of the requirements for some grant applications, is that our projects need to be in our tip. So we'd like to include projects even though we don't have funding, so that helps us in getting that funding. So we're recommending that the council adopt resolution 2365 and approve the 2022-2027 6-year transportation improvement program. If there are any questions, or would you like to do the public hearing first? Oh, you're muted.
We'll take a few questions and then we'll go to the public comment.
Okay.
Questions?
And I can't see anybody.
Councilmember Marshall, I can't. Councilmember Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Vincente. Could you explain criteria that were used for the Sidewalk Gap Program? I noticed that the city had done an assessment and I think an inventory of the sidewalk gaps. What were some of the criteria that helped you make those decisions, or that you based it on what to fix?
So with the Sidewalk Gap Program, we are in the process of identifying those priorities. What we've been using to date, based off of the severity of the problem and also the amount of public requests for making changes. That's how 61st wound up on top of the list, because we've got the most complaints about that. And of course, it's the most severe location in the city for sidewalks. The other location where we've gotten a fair number of comments and requests for changes are on 73rd. And so we're looking to combine some replacement of sidewalk panels with the 73rd pavement overlay project that is happening next year. So we're tackling both of those. And then once we get the ADA transition plan completed, we'll have a better idea of priorities for each issue that's in the city. So.
Yes, Councilmember Srebnick.
Yeah, I didn't have a question, but now I do, because I remember that we actually had some very specific criteria for where sidewalks would be going, and it had to do with, arterials were a top priority, pathways to schools were the next, connectivity to parks and other facilities was the third. It was quite specific. So I'm interested in understanding how we shifted from that to just public outcry.
So there's a difference. What Councilmember Marshall was mentioning was sidewalk gap replacement program, which deals with, it's really more focused on repairing problems and gaps in our network, whereas sidewalks in general, where we want to actually build new projects, that is based off higher criteria for arterials and schools. So those projects on 84th, 192nd, Arrowhead, those projects are either school walk routes or they're arterials. And so those were put on the tip. But the sidewalk gap replacement program is really more geared towards where we have small little sections like 50
Okay.
feet or 100 feet, or for locations where there's accessibility issues. So that's what that fund is meant to be for, and not
Okay.
used for actual sidewalk construction.
That makes sense. I'm kind of cognizant of kind of the equity issue there. If certain parts of our population may be more vocal than others, and I want to make sure that we're not creating inequities by how we do this work.
Yeah, and when we put together the transition plan, we will be looking at a lot of factors. And one of the key factors that we're going to be looking at would be accessibility for folks, but we're also looking at other factors. Right now, as you know, we're going through a process where we're trying to get input from the public in general to find out what's important to them, and then looking at where we should spend our money to get the best equity for everybody out there. And of course, we get the complaints, and we're going out and we're looking to see, is this really something that's an issue? And if it's an issue, how many people can be served by making this fix? We've gotten complaints from many other folks in different areas in the city, but they didn't raise high enough on the level to warrant us taking immediate action, unlike 61st. So.
Got it. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I want to thank staff for this list. I'm really excited seeing 181st on there in particular. I was just walking on that a couple weeks ago, and every time I've taken that walk, especially where the hill crests, you feel like you're taking your life in your hands because the sight lines are not great. I'm also excited by 84th. I know our families that live over by Morelands have been wanting that for a while. I wanted to point out a couple things that I just hope to kind of, put in the back of your head for next time when we're looking at things. But recently I was talking with folks over by 84th Place. It's a pretty busy arterial with no pedestrian amenities at all. And it goes uphill. It goes uphill, cars speed down it pretty quickly. And it also leads to Bothell High School, which serves that section of the city. There are kids that have to walk up that street every day because it's a fairly short walk to Bothell High from there. But it's not exactly the safest walk in the world. So I think that one might warrant taking a look at some point. And then also 205th, which I know is a little problematic because it's on the border with Bothell and Snohomish County, but I was over by the section over by 80th, and that was another place where walking, didn't feel particularly safe. There seems to be a lot of young families over there. It's not serving a school over there, but it would be worth having a conversation, I think, at some point with Bothell to try to figure out some way to approach that street, because I think folks who live on both sides of it feel fairly ignored as far as the issue goes by both cities, because it's hard to address those kind of border streets that we have. We've seen the same thing over where we over on, what street is that? 55th, 53rd. I can't remember where we're that curves up next to Lake Forest Park. Yeah. So I just want to toss those out there as things that I think we should take a harder look at going forward. But I love this list. I think the emphasis around schools is really important, and I appreciate the work put into it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. To give you a little precursor of what's coming into the future, we are looking to update our sidewalk priority program. And I've taken a hard look at projects that we've done and then where we have left to go. And on this map, the streets you've mentioned, I believe I've already marked off as projects that need to be considered. 205th is a little difficult. 53rd, again, is because we only own such a small stretch of that. But I'm looking at trying to make connections. For example, the neighborhood between 68th and 61st, there are sidewalks, but they don't connect to anything. So I'm looking at making connections to our sidewalk network, especially walkways and waterways going in, and trying to look at that. So things coming up here, hopefully by the end of the year, with the new sidewalk priority plan program.
And I appreciate that. I would encourage us though at some point to actually, talk with Lake Forest Park and talk with Bothell about how we approach some of those difficult streets, because I know that they're hard for us to do on our own, and we're not going to do them on our own. But both cities are kind of ignoring, especially, and those are just the two examples that popped to mind that I've walked a couple times and felt, like I was about to have to jump into a ditch to get out of a car's way if I needed to. And we have residents and they have residents that are both having to deal with that every day. And there might be a way for us to work together with our neighbor cities to add amenities for all of our residents. Because even if we just do something on one side, if it's whether it's our side or their side, it's going to increase safety for both our residents. So I would hope that at some point we would, maybe try to work it out with our neighboring cities.
Yeah, 145th is another one.
Councilmember Shrubnik, you have your hand up.
No. Sorry,
Councilmember-
I already spoke. I didn't take it down. Sorry.
Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I want to thank our staff for the hard work they put together to present this to us today. I'm really happy to see the projects that are before us. I am a little concerned about things we heard about tonight in regards to accidents near Simons Road and Northeast, or in Simons Road and 155th. Hearing about two students who've been hit in crosswalks, I understand, is very concerning to me. I'm wondering, since we do have Target Zero, and there is a wonderful collaborative program between municipalities in the state and federal called Safe Routes to Schools, as well as the school pathway. If we can work together with a solution to bring lit crosswalks to these areas. These are dark areas for our pedestrians to travel. Pedestrian safety is a #1 priority, and 2 accidents within a short period of time in the same location is concerning. So is it possible that we can look into applying for additional grants to help fund a project like that?
It is possible. I'm not aware of the accidents that were mentioned at that location. So I'd have to look into to determine what those accidents were. Depending upon the type of accident and the severity of accident will depend upon whether or not you can score well for grant funding.
Right.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And also, depending upon the cause of the accident, because what you're required to do on those grants is to tell them how you're going to solve the problem. And if it was more something that can't be fixed with a physical device, then it would not score well for granting. So just an issue with the grants. But that particular Simons, again, with the sidewalk priority program, I've got the sidewalks that are missing on Simons identified as a project that needs to be considered and evaluated. And one of the things that we evaluate with those projects are safety. So safety will increase the priority of a project. So all of that will be taken into consideration when we start looking at the priority program.
Mr. Vicente, I really appreciate that. I do think it's important that we work together with our school district around these routes near Simons Road and 155th and Northeast 157th. They're very dark for pedestrian travel and oncoming cars, dark to see, to turn into these areas. A lit crosswalk can create more visual awareness to a pedestrian passing through. So I appreciate your support and a potential outreach to North Shore School District, as these areas do meet the Safe Routes to School grant fund pathway that they would be more interested in doing, being versus further down. So I appreciate your efforts and thank you. I look forward to the upcoming improvements for Kenmore.
Mr. City Manager, could you please get us some information as a council to those 2 accidents that happened there by the school that was referred to? Thank you. Any other questions? Councilor File, do you have another question?
No, sir.
All right. If there are no more questions, we have a public hearing. Public hearing, it has to do with the Transportation Improvement Program. Is there anybody wishing to be heard? Madam Clerk?
Mayor Baker, I see one hand raised, and I'm going to promote that person. Stacy V. Stacy V.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
I just wanted to thank John Vicente and Rob for taking seriously and bringing forward the Simons Road problems on 84th. I think a lot of the residents had really come forward with that whole street was a problem and that they needed them to relook at it. And then I think the other biggest complaint was on the actual Juanita Drive, that the right-hand lane was taken away. And if the planters can possibly be removed and a right-hand turn into that complex be put back, I'm sure a lot of residents would also appreciate that, because the traffic is held up because of the people that are in the turning lane, as well as the people for the turning are held up because they can't get to their exit. I think a lot of this other sidewalk progress is really good for the city. So I just wanted to say I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Baker, I see one more hand raised. Brianne Gilbert. Brianne Gilbert.
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm just joining in now, so I don't know what was talked about prior to what I just heard with Karina File. I'm the parent of the 14-year-old that was hit in the crosswalk last Wednesday morning, and just wanted to speak on that if there's time allowed for it. He was crossing over to go to basketball practice in the morning at 8:05 and waited for the signal to turn green and proceeded to walk, and a car came flying through that intersection and had crossed over the first crosswalk and then into the second crosswalk, where he ran out of the way and it clipped the back of his ankle, throwing his shoe off into the bushes. The car did stop and reverse and roll down the window and ask him if he was okay. He said he was, and the car drove off. There was eyewitnesses that I've been in touch with, but I do see an imminent need for the crosswalk lights. We need lights there to where the whole crosswalk lights up, just like the one that is just a few hundred feet up the road for Inglemore. That is the sole intersection entrance and exit for that high school, which is, half of the attending students are new drivers. I used to work there for 2 years, and I've seen close call after close call. And after this incident, it's just, we have to do something before it's too late. When I posted on Facebook, I've had 5 people reach out with different stories at that intersection. 2 of them were killed on Simons. The other 3 were just close calls. Is there any more details I could tell you about it, or is there somebody else that I could email? I know Karina, I've already reached out to you. I just want to know what I can do to get something done, signatures, whatever it takes to get something in the works.
We certainly appreciate your comments, and but this is a public hearing having to do with our transportation improvement program.
Okay.
Citizen comment was at the first part of the meeting, and this is something different, but we certainly are concerned. And one of Councilmember Files' requests was to look for grant funding and to see whether or not we could provide lighted grants opportunities for lighted sidewalk crossings. So we are aware of it, and we are going to be looking into it. But right now we are dealing with a public hearing on resolution number 21-365, adopting the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program. Is there anybody else wishing to be heard? Is there anybody else wishing to be heard on the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program? Is there anybody else wishing to be heard on the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program?
Mayor Baker, there are no additional hands.
Hearing no one coming forward, public hearing is closed. All right. Any other questions, any other comments dealing with resolution number 21-365, adopting the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program? Seeing no further questions, Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. In relation to adopting this resolution, I appreciate the opportunity to make a second request to our council for consideration and hopefully a second in support to consider additional lighting strip near the high school of Northeast 155th and Northeast 157th and Simons Road for grant funding. I think this is a simple enough request. We do have Target Zero as a #1 initiative in pedestrian safety, and we are committed to that effort.
We are, but right now we do have a resolution dealing with the public hearing that we need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are no further questions dealing with resolution 21-365 and adopting the 2022 to 2027 Transportation Improvement Program, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt resolution number 21-365. Councilmember Marshall?
Just a question, would Councilmember File's proposal on the lighting strips, is that something that we could properly consider as part of this plan to be considered now, or should it be done separately, or could we consider it now? I guess for Mr. Vincente and Mr. City Manager Carl Lindsay and possibly the City Attorney. Thank you.
Yeah, all three. Could you please weigh in on this? Mr. Vincente, is there proper studies been done?
So when you put in a signal at an intersection, there's always a warrant analysis that's done, which also, when you put the signal in, you also have to make sure that you've got good lighting for the intersection. I don't know what has been done in the recent years. It is something that we can look at, but given the situation, 8 a.m., if I'm not mistaken, it's fairly bright at 8 a.m. And I don't know if lighting would make a difference in that situation, but we can definitely look and see if there are some lighting issues at that intersection. When it comes to grants, a signal is the most extreme measure you can put at an intersection for control. And if we were to go out for grant funds, I'm not certain what I would be asking for that would be funded. But we can look into it. We can look to see what improvements could be made there and figure out cost and determine whether or not that would be a grant fund or would come out of some local dollars to make some improvements. But again, my traffic engineer is, he's looking into it. I actually got a message from him saying that he had looked into it. Unfortunately, I'm on vacation this week, so I haven't gotten to my emails. But it's something that I'll probably take a look at when I get back. But to answer the question about putting it into this tip, we could, but I wouldn't know what to say. You know, until we do analysis, I can't add something unless I know what we're doing. So this would be more of an investigation that we would have to do and then decide if a project needs to go in.
And I'd also encourage Ms. Gilbert to fill out a service request so that we can get all the information on what happened from her directly. And that's pretty easy to fill out on our city website, kenmorewa.gov. And once she does that, then our traffic engineer can get directly in contact with her and get more details, and he can more thoroughly assess the situation.
City Attorney.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also just wanted to let the council know that the TIP can be amended. And so to the extent that the city engineer reviews it and finds a concrete project, you can always come back and amend your TIP.
All right. So Chair will entertain a motion to approve Resolution 21-365. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember File,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Kane,
Yes.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember Kugler,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yes.
The vote passes unanimously.
All right. The next item on the agenda is a climate action plan, target setting and vulnerability assessment, presented by us Environmental Services Administrative Specialist, Sammie Roeun, and the Environmental Services Manager, Mr. Richard Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. We are excited to be here this evening to present to you our draft deliverables for Phase 1 of the Climate Action Plan. I'm joined tonight by our consultant team, Angela Peachman and Mike Chang, as well as the mayor mentioned, myself and Sammie. And this evening, what we plan to present are kind of multiple items here. We wanted to go over the results of our Phase 1 engagement efforts. We've done quite a bit of work so far with staff, the community, and so we got some interesting results there. We have proposed some greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So we will be presenting that to you tonight. And we ask that you let us know what you think, provide any feedback, comments, changes that you'd like to see. However, if you're happy with what we are proposing this evening, we're happy to have you vote to approve those, and then that can save, we can go right into Phase 2 without having to come back in a few weeks to meet with you again if there's any changes needed. We also have a draft vulnerability assessment. So hopefully you've had a chance to look over that memo. And again, we're here tonight to take any feedback or comments you have regarding that vulnerability assessment. And again, as with the reduction targets, if you're happy with what we've proposed, we can go ahead and approve and move on from that tonight as well. And with that, we've got a lot to go over, so I just want to jump right into it. I'm going to turn this over to, I'm sorry, Angela, was it you or Mike going first?
I'm going first, yeah, thanks.
Great, so turn it over to you, Angela, thanks.
Great. So I'm just going to kick things off by introducing some of our engagement findings. So as you might remember from the last time we met all of you, we were kicking off our Phase 1 engagement, which was one of 3 phases in a larger engagement planning effort. So we have some high-level findings we'd like to share with you today. A quick note that we are preparing a more comprehensive and robust engagement summary that will be available for review. So we're just sharing some preliminary findings this evening just to inform some of the decision-making tonight. So with that said, I wanted to just give a quick overview of our online survey. We had a total of over 1,500 responses to the survey. Our findings from that survey were that the majority of the respondents somewhat agree that climate action can help save money and resources. They strongly agree that climate action is good for the health and livability of Kenmore's community. And they believe that the city and state government should be the ones primarily responsible for acting on climate change. In general, respondents were aware of some climate change issues, but not deeply familiar with many of them. 1,500 responses is a lot, and I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity or caveat there.
We didn't restrict the number of times that the survey could be taken from a single computer. And this is really just an equity issue. We didn't want to prohibit folks who access public computers, so people who use the library or college campus, or they share a computer at home. We didn't want to restrict them from being able to access the survey. But because of that, and because the survey was online and open to anyone, there's always potential for error and for biased results. So what our team did was we reviewed the survey results in kind of two ways. The first way was including all of the results. And then we did a secondary analysis with some exclusions, where we reviewed for things like the same IP address, the same name, the same email, or things that might trigger suspicion, like the same open-ended responses multiple times, things like that. And so this analysis just helped us kind of figure out if the potentially false survey responses had any significant impact on overall results. So our analysis to date does not indicate significant changes in results when we use the exclusion method. But again, we're preparing a robust summary that will unpack these findings in a little bit more detail. So all this to say that online survey data has a potential for error, and that should be taken into consideration when decision making. We've tried to mitigate for this bias by using a variety of engagement strategies over the course of the CAP so that we can present an overall picture of the community's preferences versus relying on just one engagement platform like a survey. We also hosted a community roundtable during phase 1 in which 6 Kenmore residents or employees, or sorry, I should say people who work in Kenmore, including a pastor, 2 teachers, an assistant principal, met and just really talked about some of these issues in a more intimate setting where they could kind of expand on answers and provide additional context more so than a survey would offer. These respondents envision Kenmore being comfortable, walkable, and feeling a shared sense of community. These respondents also wanted the CAP to prioritize equity, healthy habitats, and alternative energy sources. And they identified community engagement and green space preservation as kind of key opportunities for the city to consider further when taking climate action. In addition to those 2 outreach methods for the community, we supplemented that with city staff interviews. So we conducted about 7 interviews with employees from the environmental services, development services, community development, public works, and city manager's office. And what we gleaned from those interviews were some key opportunities, opportunities for policy changes, green building efforts, state mandates, and electrifying the city's fleet. Barriers that were identified from previous efforts included cost and a lack of public awareness. And some ideas for sustainability actions include purchase of electric vehicles, implementing transportation improvements, and pavement preservation programs. So with that, that's just some context going into our series of slides here on emissions reduction targets. Excuse me, Sarah, just trying to get my screen to line up. So we have, this might look familiar to some of you who participated in our meeting at the end of last year. This is just an emissions profile based on our inventories that were conducted last year. So we're presenting both the 2017 greenhouse gas inventory and a 2019 greenhouse gas inventory. 2019 is the year that the city has selected as its baseline emissions year. So it's kind of the point from which you measure emissions into the future. And the 2017 year is more for trending purposes. So what you can see here is that emissions from electricity, natural gas, and on-road equipment are the primary sources of Kenmore's emissions. And emissions increased from 2017 to 2019 by over 3%. Just as a caveat, during that same period, Kenmore's population increased by 3.28%. So on a per capita basis, which means we're controlling for population growth, that means that emissions increased by 0.15%. And this just indicates that the increase in emissions cannot be attributed solely to population growth. And in the absence of climate action, we can expect that Kenmore's emissions will increase into the future as your population grows. One caveat here is that these inventories include emissions that could be reliably estimated and calculated using best available data and science. And we use the standard methodology outlined in the US Community Protocol to ensure that the emissions inventory was standardized with that protocol. If we are to project that initial baseline out into the future, we have forecasted emissions as shown here. So we basically scaled your data through 2050, assuming that emissions will increase as population, number of jobs, and housing units in the city continue to grow. What you see on this blue line here is what we call the BAU scenario, or business as usual. And this represents the direction that your emissions are heading in a no action future. So if Kenmore, the state, the federal government takes no climate action, that's what you can expect your emissions might look like by the year 2050. So what we've done, oops, sorry, go backwards. So we've adjusted that business as usual projection to account for 3 key policies and regulations that have already been adopted. The first one is SETA, and that's this black wedge here. What that is the Clean Energy Transformation Act. It's a Washington policy that requires all electric utilities to eliminate coal-fired electricity from their portfolios by 2025 and become greenhouse gas neutral by 2030. So you can see there's a drop in 2025 emissions, and then past 2030, you are basically not going to see emissions from electricity as long as the providers adopt that and implement it. The other piece we have here is this greenish line, this smaller greenish line, and that represents Washington's energy-related building standards. So these standards require the adoption of state energy codes in new buildings for the period of 2013 through 2031. And for those new buildings, they should be incrementally moving towards achieving a 70% reduction in net annual energy consumption. So that's both electricity and natural gas. And finally, we have this bright blue slice here, and that represents the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration's corporate average fuel economy standards, or CAFE standards. And these regulate light and heavy duty vehicle fuel economy standards. So that's basically how many miles the vehicle can travel per gallon of fuel. And you'll notice with the implementation of these standards, as more of these newer vehicles are rolled out onto the road and replacing older vehicles, you'll realize more benefits into the future. So what are we left with? We're left with this darker green wedge down here, and that represents the emissions that we expect you will need to reduce through your cap to meet the goals and targets. And so we've plotted the overarching emissions reduction targets here that were adopted on June 23rd by King County's Growth Management Planning Council. Those targets are a reduction of 2007 emissions by 50% by 2030, a reduction of 75% by 2040, and a reduction of 95% by 2050, in addition to net zero emissions. And I can talk more about that on our next slide. So this slide just presents a comparison of adopted targets. We have the federal targets, we have Washington State's targets. We show the King County, I'm gonna mess up the acronym, King County cities' current adopted targets, and then the GMPC adopted targets, which were just adopted last week on the 23rd. So each of these has kind of a different baseline year, but for consistency, most of them have a 50% reduction by 2030. The GMPC targets align with what we're proposing, which is a 70% reduction in 2040. And finally, by 2050, we're proposing a 95% reduction plus net zero emissions. And in the context of greenhouse gas emissions, net zero refers to emitting the same amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that you offset by some other means. So you can achieve that by either reducing your greenhouse gases to zero through active measures, or offsetting that remaining 5% through carbon offset credits or carbon sequestration, or some combination of the two. So we've used the 2019 baseline emissions in our last, let me go back a slide. We're using the 2019 baseline emissions here to present these targets, but you'll notice on this slide, King County is using a 2007 baseline, excuse me. So if you would prefer to use that baseline, that's an option. It would just require backcasting your 2019 emissions since you haven't completed a 2007 greenhouse gas inventory. So it's just something to think about. For reference, King County's reported emissions increased by about 1% from 2008 to 2017. So we don't expect that a 2007 versus a 2019 baseline would significantly impact the amount of emissions that you need to offset. What did we hear from the public? So overall results from our engagement indicate that Kenmore should align its emissions reduction targets with King County. Community feedback tended to lean towards being a little bit more ambitious than these targets, while city staff leaned towards being a little bit less ambitious than these targets. For clarity, about half of the city staff said they would need more information in order to make a recommendation, and some indicated that Kenmore should base its targets off of its current performance levels versus adopting King County standard. The majority of the community roundtable participants indicated that Kenmore should be in alignment or on par with King County's goals, with a slight preference towards more ambitious. And in this graph, you can see that our online survey results indicate a preference for aligning with King County's targets, with a small preference leaning towards more ambitious. As I mentioned previously, we analyzed the data in two ways. One was including all responses, and then we did another review, kind of removing those questionable responses that may have been duplicative or erroneous. So you can kind of see the trend is just about the same, with a strong preference towards the middle, which is alignment. This represents alignment with King County targets. So middle would be in alignment with King County. To the far right would be more aggressive than King County, and to the far left would be less aggressive than King County. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike, who will walk us through the results of the climate vulnerability assessment.
Hey, Angela, do you mind if I just step in real quick?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I don't know if council would prefer, so we're going to switch from our reduction targets to the climate vulnerability assessment. I'm happy we can take everything at the end, or would council prefer to have questions or talk about reduction targets while we're here before we transition?
Deputy Mayor.
I think it'll be cleaner if we just do one and then the other with questions for each one as we go.
Okay.
Great.
So I actually do have one question, then kind of going off of what Ms. Grayland brought up during public comment. You know, when I searched through there, I did find one mention of 17%. That's if we were to only follow what, and correct me if I'm reading this wrong also, but it seemed like the 17% was only if, hang on, I'm searching it again, was only if we were following the state and federal policy changes that are included there from 2019 to 2050. Then there is that big dark green wedge that you showed that said, you know, emissions to reduce through CAP. So just to clarify, we have not yet identified how we're going to achieve that wedge. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's what you need to do, not how to do it right now. So this is like
Right.
the end point. Yeah.
So the goals are whatever we decide tonight, and it's, you know, likely something along King County, the line of King County. But how we get there is a discussion for later on in the process.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm not sure where the 17% number came from. I don't know if anyone can clarify that. I don't know if that was in our materials. The targets that we are recommending are outlined here in this table, which would be the 50%, 75%, and 95%. So
yeah,
apologies if there's confusion, or sorry, go ahead.
17% is mentioned on page 2 under emissions forecast, the second bullet there. It says when considering the anticipated impacts of state and federal policies, Kenmore's total GHG emissions are expected to decrease overall by 17% from 2019 to 2050.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes more sense. That's if you took no action, the reduction you would expect to receive. Yeah.
And just one other clarification too is, you know, these are total emission reductions. So they're not adjusted for population growth or anything. That was just kind of to explain that even adjusted for population growth, we were still seeing some increase. But when you see these numbers, we're talking total emissions for these goals.
All right, any other questions? Hearing none, let's go ahead and, Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. You know, when I am looking at this slide, for example, and I'm also comparing it to the King County GHG emissions, similar analysis, I'm seeing a deeper dive. And while I absolutely like the idea of matching state standards, I'm very much more comfortable doing our part of engaging the King County strategic climate action plan. If we're not holding up our own end of that work, we're not doing enough. And I believe the state takes a little bit of a lighter cast to that work. So I'd rather be more advantageous and ambitious and work towards stronger outcomes for a cleaner environment for tomorrow. And that's just my thoughts on that before moving on. But one of the things I have seen in difference of looking at this analysis and like the King County Strategic Climate Action Plan is how to get there, like phasing out hydrofluorocarbons and looking at those emissions associated with consumption for goods and services. I didn't really see that piece really filtered through this process. It's kind of brushed over, but that is those things are huge contributing factors, and they are a piece of this puzzle. I appreciate the work that's done. I just wanted to share these concerns before moving forward.
Councilmember O'Kane.
Hey, first, I just want to mention that I'm experiencing a migraine, and that's why I've had my screen off. So I just want to make sure that you know that I'm here, fully present, but I'm having issues with glare. But on another note, I was just wondering if I could see the slide with the public comment again, because I have a question about that. The one with the data related to their, yes, this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly when I look at it. It seems to me that although the majority are, let's stick with King K4C standards, but if we look at if we have like a peak in the chart, but when we look at it, the vast majority of people who have participated actually do appear to want at least or more, like significantly moving to the right rather than to the left of the standard, at least according to the counts that I can see. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so we acknowledge here that while there is the middle of the road preference, there is a preference leaning towards more ambitious, and we emphasize that on this last slide too. So there's some, I would say the majority is middle, but yes, to your point, it's definitely leaning more ambitious. And so if the council is interested, we can share thoughts on how you could be more ambitious if you chose to. But yes, you're reading that correctly.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, I was just curious about if I were going to take all the numbers together, it felt pretty significant to me looking at it that way. I certainly would be interested in ways to be more ambitious, but I'm comfortable with where we're at in this conversation. I just want to make sure that I was reading that the way I understood it properly. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Thank you. First, I just want to thank staff and Cascadia for this really great work, both what we're seeing now and the vulnerability assessment. It's incredibly professional and thorough. And I had a similar response to Councilmember O'Kane, seeing this in that same way. And I guess my question is, when we get to the selection of strategies, will we be able to kind of estimate the impact of each? I assume we will, because otherwise, how would we prioritize the impact of each strategy? And we could potentially select more strategies to have a greater impact, because I would also like to see us push it a bit beyond the kind of modal King County target.
Yeah, that's a great question. So our strategies and actions will have qualitative indicators for the significance of the impact. So for example, building electrification, we know that will have a big impact on emissions, but our scope of work doesn't include actually quantifying those emissions. I would just offer that we do have a contingency fund, but We're not scoped to do that additional granularity of analysis. However, we do have pretty good sense based on working with other clients and especially other clients within Kent County about the potential emissions reduction that could be possible through these strategies and actions. So it's a bit of a hybrid answer, but yes, we do generally know the actions that move the needle the most significantly. Are we going to be able to put a number on that? Not through our current scope of work.
But if I can add on that, we do scope out incremental updates. So as we move in every couple years, we are conducting our greenhouse gas inventories and measuring the progress and tracking our trends to actually measure and see how effective our strategies are going. And if we need to adjust them, we can.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Councilmember O'Kane.
And I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this question, but I do recall at the retreat, we were talking about stopping natural gas in new construction and proposing something along those lines. Would this be a time for us to be giving consideration to that as a council?
I think, and actually Deputy Mayor Herbig and Councilmember File kind of also touched on this. So in phase 3, which is the next phase we're going into, that is when we dive into all the strategies, and we will be doing outreach with the community. We'll be coming back to council and discussing those strategies and getting your feedback. So I think it's been mentioned a couple times that this report's a little bit light on the how are we going to do this. And yes, that's not what we're here tonight to get into yet. We're just asking you to tell us what's that number goal you want us to reach. When we know that, we can come back to the table and figure out what strategies will best get us there.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Richard.
Councilmember Kugler.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I have a question about, I don't know why, for some reason I feel like setting the targets without talking about the strategies to hit them is sort of challenging to separate, but I understand that what we're saying here is that we're going to minimally hit these numbers that align with our regional and state goals, which I think makes sense. And hopefully we can be more aggressive and ambitious in furthering that agenda. I was wondering if any of the regional or state targets also come with sort of accountability measures, and what happens if those targets are not hit? I'm curious what other agencies are saying, if there are any.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess I don't know if there's a direct consequence. I'd have to do a little bit more digging on that, but a lot of jurisdictions will commit to some sort of oversight and accountability body, and whether that's an internal like sort of task force or an external task force where you're holding yourselves accountable to the public. Those are some strategies we've seen in the past. I think the other thing that, and this is more of a city staff management item, but developing key performance indicators that show you on a year-to-year or 5-year, 10-year basis if you're trending towards hitting your milestones. So maybe you don't do an inventory every year, but you might know the number of, you might know your mode share or things like that. So you can see year over year if your number of single occupancy vehicles are decreasing or if your PEDs are increasing, things like that. So yeah, I can get back to you on more of like the enforcement piece of it if you're not hitting your targets, but those are kind of the options I've seen of just having some sort of body that oversees the accountability and or internal metric tracking into the future that happens between your inventory years to see if you're trending towards hitting your goals.
Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. And just pivoting off of what Councilmember Kugler just mentioned, King County does have a climate community task force, an equity task force that they put in place. And it seems like a really good opportunity and option to consider as they just started their climate equity community task force more recently. And that stems around ensuring that we're keeping the focus, ensuring our sustainability and our resiliency as we work forward. So I would like to consider that for inclusion. And I hope that our colleagues would appreciate that inclusion method. So thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
Is it okay to move into the vulnerability? Okay, great. Well, Mike, I think you're on deck for this one.
Great. Thank you, Angela, and everyone for attending tonight. So I think this is my first time being here at the City Council meeting and meeting everyone. So I'll just start out with a brief introduction for myself. So good evening, everyone. So my name is Mike Chang. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm an associate at Cascadia Consulting Group. I specifically specialize in a lot of the technical vulnerability assessments and lead a lot of Cascadia's vulnerability work. I'm also based in Seattle, and I work also on a lot of regional climate impacts assessments as well. And I was an author for the 4th National Climate Assessment. So there's a lot of background here that's both tailored for the Puget Sound area as well as for Kenmore specifically. So I'm really excited to present some of these findings to you all tonight. So I wanted to, before jumping into the vulnerability assessment, I wanted to provide a quick overview of what vulnerability assessments are. So vulnerability assessments are a technical analysis of how climate change will affect a community based on climate models, anticipated climate impacts, and the ability of the community to adapt or cope with those impacts. All in all, these vulnerability assessments are important to conduct because we can assess the potential impacts and consequences of climate change, specifically the areas that the community is vulnerable to future climate change. And essentially, when we talk about vulnerability, what we mean is we gather all the potential climate impacts that we anticipate for the community, and then we subtract the ability or the potential of that community to adapt or cope with those future climate change impacts. And so the vulnerability in the end shows essentially the delta, or what's the difference that we can't at the moment adapt to or adapt for. This is really important because it helps identify the priority areas of vulnerability to climate change, which can help inform specific climate action strategies to build resilience to future climate impacts. So what we see here, so this table here shows the delta relative to 2020 as a baseline year. And so going through this, for the average high temperatures, so the average daily temperature high, we're going to see an increase of about 2.5 degrees by 2050 from the current annual average daily temperature high to about 7.5 degrees warmer by the end of the century. The number of extreme heat days we anticipate will extend by another 9 days, and by the end of the century, another 44 days. The maximum daily temperature high we anticipate will increase by almost 2 degrees, and by the end of the century, almost 9 degrees. And then finally thinking about this, and I feel like this is especially pertinent now, is the number of consecutive days of extreme heat, which we identify as 9 degrees greater above historical temperature highs. We're going to see that extended by about 3.5 days by the middle of the century, and by 20.52 days by the end of the century. And additionally, the other main climate stressor, in addition to temperature and heat we're concerned about, is related to precipitation and flooding. So in the future, I'll start with the bottom row first. We anticipate that there's going to be a huge decrease in anticipated annual winter snowfall. So we're going to see during the winter times, less precipitation falling in the form as snow, and more precipitation falling in the summer or in the winter as rain. In addition to that, when we see rain events happen, we're also going to see the intensity of those rain events to increase. And so you can see here by the middle of the century, when it rains, it's going to be about 28% more intense. And by the end of the century, it's going to be about 50% more intense as well. Some of the things to think about on this slide. One note is all of these numbers are virtually Kenmore specific. So they aren't for other communities around King County. These are tailored and downscaled climate projections for the city of Kenmore. In addition, while these numbers really feel drastic right now, they don't actually account for the potential for future greenhouse gas reductions. And so that's why it's really important to think about greenhouse gas reduction at a local scale and a regional scale and a global scale. Next slide, please. So in addition to thinking about all of these climate stressors, I know a lot of these times these just feel like numbers, and it can be hard to really relate to like, why do these changes feel relevant? And so in the case of extreme heat, some of the community impacts that we expect to happen, we're going to see an increase in heat-related illnesses. We're also going to see an increase in air quality concerns, specifically around wildfire smoke. As you know, I think since around 2015, we've seen multiple days of wildfire smoke coming from regional wildfires across the Pacific Northwest. In addition, a smaller concern to think about is the warmer temperatures impact on smog. So with warmer temperatures, it affects air circulation patterns. It also affects precipitation, especially summer precipitation. And so with those combined impacts, it'll be harder to dissipate ground level ozone or smog in the future as well. One of the things we also wanted to draw attention to is despite the whole community feeling all of these impacts, we also know these impacts won't be felt equally by all community members. And so in the right-hand column, we also see these groups of concern. And so for heat-related illnesses and air quality impacts, specific groups of concerns include elderly folks, youth, specifically infants and babies who are more susceptible to these changes, people with pre-existing conditions, specifically cardiovascular and respiratory conditions and diabetes, as well as people, low-income households living in denser areas as well. In addition to that, with more heat and heat events, we're going to see an increase in energy demand, which will mean additional stress on the energy grid and system. As we can see now during this current extreme heat event, many of us are running fans, air conditioning, running colder water, and all of those are cumulative and additive impacts on the system as well, and could put additional demand on a limited supply at any given time. And specifically, we wanted to call attention to a specific group of concern. I think people who live in older homes. Typically, older homes don't have as the ability to be more efficient with either energy usage or utility usage. And so thinking about some of the potential impacts in folks who live in older housing stock. Additionally, there is a correlation between warmer temperatures and increased rates of corrosion, specifically on buildings. And so it will both do two primary things. It's going to increase the number of times a building needs to be made, or the maintenance for specific buildings. And it might also decrease the lifespan of infrastructure in buildings as well. On the heavy rains and flooding side, the really big impact that emerged is flooding impacts, and specifically to different types of areas and systems for Kenmore. That includes green space, native habitats, key infrastructure, and transportation routes. Some of the considerations and groups of concerns, people who commute, so people who are reliant on transportation routes, whether by car, by public transportation, by bike. If areas flood, it's going to be harder to navigate that. In addition to that, industries who are reliant on 522 or transportation routes through Kenmore may also be disrupted as well. And that came from a statewide vulnerability assessment of all state routes as well. Additionally, with more flooding events, we also see more infectious diseases that might be waterborne. So for instance, there's correlations between extreme rains as well as outbreaks of shigellosis, specifically under the unhoused population as well. Furthermore, with heavier rain events or more intense rain events, it could also disrupt soil, which could lead to mostly small-scale landslides and mudslides. However, even with small mudslides or landslides that happen, that can disrupt trails, public transportation routes. It could damage homes as well. So even though that's a small impact, it's still a consideration in the future. So a lot of these impacts, next slide, please, were also reflected in a lot of the public engagement efforts that we did as well. So kind of building off of what Angela was describing on the phase 1 engagement, we found that city staff are primarily worried about increased flooding events, specifically the impacts of future flooding will have within their departments, as well as Kenmore's infrastructure, which includes their roads, their stormwater and sewer system. Community survey respondents also said that they are somewhat concerned about future climate impacts, and they believe that their families, as well as the city, is somewhat prepared to deal with these impacts as well. Finally, roundtable participants are concerned with increasing temperatures, drought, and wildfire events as major concerns. And so finally, I wanted to, not finally, but this is my second to last slide. So I think it's really hard, especially at this given moment, to talk about climate change without talking about the current heat wave we're currently experiencing. And so these are 3 headlines from yesterday and today from the New York Times, NPR, and the Washington Post, respectively. So we're making national headlines at the moment. And so the temperatures we're experiencing today, actually, as well as this past weekend, is ranging about 30 to 40 degrees warmer than our historic high, our average highs for June within this region. This is also a situation when we talk about adaptive capacity, our ability to adapt. One way to adapt is having cooling systems such as fans or air conditioning. And we're living in a area within the country where 44% of households within King County have access to air conditioning in their homes as well. Some of the things that the Seattle office of the National Weather Service they've called this insane, bonkers, incredible, and no analogous situation that this region has ever experienced. So really kind of what we're experiencing right now is indicative of how future climate change will manifest as well. And so finally, going to the next slide, this is kind of circling back to one of the reasons why we do these vulnerability assessments to begin with. They identify areas of vulnerability for the city and can help identify specific resilience building strategies for the city to take to ensure that their community and their residents are prepared for future climate action, or not future climate impacts. And so some of the, while we didn't do kind of a deep dive because we're not at that strategy and action, some of the common resilience building actions include kind of promoting the conservation or preservation of open space and natural habitats. A lot of these natural habitats can act as natural flooding buffers. They can also, both in terms of protecting buildings from flooding from, I think, specific streams, tributaries, and of the Sammamish River as well. They can also act as a natural stormwater system where they can like soak up stormwater or runoff from heavy rain events. In addition, climate smart growth and development. So knowing kind of where future flooding events may happen, future landslide or mudslide prone areas can definitely inform where to invest in future development and growth for the city. One other thing, especially now, is thinking about social and community cohesion. I think one of these things, it's harder to identify how do we measure this or how do we implement something that promotes this. But we also find that within the scientific literature that a community that feels more cohesive is able to support one another. I always think about, at least for myself, I am lucky enough to have a portable air conditioner in my unit. And over the past few days, I've had multiple friends reach out to me to see if they could just come sit in my living room because I have AC in my apartment. Kind of building on that, air conditioning and cooling centers. This is something I think we've seen in force over this past weekend with multiple jurisdictions kind of rededicating community centers such as libraries to act as cooling centers to help cool people off. And finally, providing access to air filtration devices, both such as box fans or even N95 masks, can help reduce exposure to future wildfire smoke, which can be really acute as well. So I'll pause there. I think that's the end before we go into next steps. And so welcome any comments or questions as well.
Any questions? I'm not seeing any, so let's go ahead and move to next steps.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So here, we're just kind of providing a calendar. We've shown this at our previous meetings moving forward. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this evening we were presenting the draft reduction targets and vulnerability assessment here at the end of phase 1. And we welcome any feedback. If there are any changes or a different direction that council would like us to take, we would be happy to take those comments. We can incorporate those into the draft and then come back in July to adopt those changes. Or if there are no major or significant changes that council wants to see, we can and you can go ahead and approve those tonight, and we're happy to kind of just get going into phase 2 right away. Oops, sorry, just back at that calendar real quick. So phase 2, again, we'll be working on through summer and coming back in early fall to finalize those strategies. And again, we're going to have several opportunities through summer and into fall to engage with the community, with council, with staff, as we are vetting through these strategies and putting together that draft. And then towards the end of the year, we'll have those approved and kind of finally put together that final plan, which will include what you're approving either at this meeting or the next meeting, the strategies through summer and fall, and then we'll put that plan together for final adoption early next year. And then the next slide. Was I still taking this one too, Angela? Sorry.
I can do this one if you want. This is basically just getting everyone excited for phase 2. So what we've already talked about today, we know what to do, but now we need to know how to do it. So this slide here just kind of gives you an overview. Mitigation is more what I was speaking about. So reducing your greenhouse gas emissions and increasing carbon sinks to store those gases. And then Mike talked more about the adaptation. So managing those impacts on vulnerable social and biological systems. And then you can kind of see this little Venn diagram shows you what's going to be overlap and what is going to be addressed by both types of actions.
Excellent. Thank you, Angela. So we're at the end of our presentation. So again, it sounds like there was, with Mike's presentation, we didn't get a lot of questions. If council is happy with what we put together as far as the vulnerability assessment goes, we're happy to get that approved. And then you'll see that section as we presented tonight, get integrated into the final climate action plan. And then kind of going back to the reduction targets, it sounded like there was still a bit of conversation. So if I could just, we just asked that if there's any clear direction or change that council would like to see, we're happy to take that now.
Councilmember Srebnick.
Yeah, on that note, I mean, it sounded like a number of us would, if we could, like to push those targets. And what I'm wondering is if we kind of adopt the modal targets now, and then we talk about the strategies. I had the same response as Councilmember Kugler. I'm having trouble doing one cart before the horse. But once we talk about the strategies, and if we feel like we need and could revisit the targets at that point, could we up them at that point? We're not locked in, correct?
I don't want to speak for you, Richard, but I would say yes. I mean, if folks aren't ready to adopt something tonight, I don't see a reason why we couldn't move forward with these as our working targets. And then if council chose to do something more ambitious after kind of seeing what the strategies and actions are, that would be an option. What some places choose to do is to adopt a formal target and then later adopt like a stretch target, or kind of like a target that you want to hit, but you don't want to formally adopt because you aren't sure if you're going to get there or not. It might be more of a reach goal. So you have options. I mean, I don't know, Richard, unless you have a different take on that.
No, I was just going to add, I mean, this is definitely a flexible document. It's at your discretion of how aggressive you'd like to be with these reduction targets. And you can always direct staff to update as needed. As I mentioned, this will be a living document moving forward. So we plan on always measuring our progress and making changes as needed. So there will always be opportunities to, as Angela mentioned, to change these.
Great, thank you. I'm certainly then, on that note, comfortable with the modal level at this point then.
Councilmember O'Kane?
Let me just find the right way, because I'm with Councilmember Shrevenick, but at the same time, I'm just thinking strategically about what we really need to do. And since we not only have climate action plan targets, we've got budget needs, and especially given the vulnerability assessment that we just heard, the experience that we're going through today, which is not going to be the last time we're going to have 109-degree temperature in Kenmore, especially with the projections that we were given earlier in this presentation. I don't know when we as a council would be open and ready to have higher targeted goals. But I think we as a council should do that. It's kind of like the moonshot, Kennedy's moonshot. In 1969, no one could get to the moon, but we got there in 9 years. What is it that the city of Kenmore can do? And I think we should have stretch goals, not moderate goals, because the higher we shoot, the higher we'll go. And I also know that we're going to have to figure out how to fund it. And if we're middle of the road targets, we won't budget high enough to meet what we need to do for our community. So just my perspective is I am someone who strongly supports higher emissions reduction goals than K4C at this time. But I also, I want to work with the council, but I just want to say, let's aim high. We deserve to do as much as we can to protect our environment and create a healthier, safer place for all of our community members. Thank you.
All right, any questions, any further questions? Deputy Mayor.
I mean, correct if I'm wrong, but if I'm looking at this chart right here, the proposed for Kenmore is in fact more ambitious than K4C. Is that correct, or am I reading this wrong?
Yeah, it's a good question. So currently K4C has adopted the targets in this middle row here.
Right.
But on June 23rd, the GMPC adopted these updated targets, which are expected to be the new K4C targets. So kind of as a first step in the process was this one, but you can expect that the modified K4C targets will be in line with this GMC adopted, or GMPC, excuse me.
Thank you.
Yeah, I believe it's actually in the K4C kind of bylaws that whatever the GMPC adopts, it will trickle down and become the K4C target.
Anybody else? Councilmember File.
Thank you. I would feel more comfortable taking a stronger approach and leaning into higher, more ambitious goals. And so that being said, I'm happy with this Kimmer proposed soft goal here, but we are supposed to be reaching that net zero by 2050. So I think we should be aiming there. That being said, if we don't take this seriously enough, we're going to see the social economic disparities and those fiscal impacts to our community and our city trying to catch up with the emergencies of flooding and high heat occasions, trying to assess the needs of our community to serve them better with cooling stations, misting stations, gray water systems, something I did not hear within this packet. But that being said, I'm in for a stronger goal approach. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
I mean, I support being more aggressive. My question to either staff, consultants, or my colleagues who are interested in being more aggressive is, what would those numbers look like? Do we push things to 2045, or what would, if we wanted to be more aggressive than the GMPC numbers, what could that potentially look like then? Is I guess my question.
Yeah, I can share some insights on that. So to your point, you could do it faster. So you could reach these goals sooner. That would be more aggressive. You could adopt municipal targets. Right now, this is just for your community-wide emissions. So the city could choose to be a leader and get there faster on its own, take more of its own action to kind of set the example for the community. You can set interim targets, so goals between years, or very specific goals, like I want to reduce the vehicle miles traveled by X%. So in addition to these top level goals, setting goals that kind of nest underneath of it. So there's just a few options for you to consider. I guess getting there faster is typically what people think about being more aggressive. So if you were to achieve carbon neutrality by 2045 or something to that effect.
Councilmember Shrubnik.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And what I'm wondering, and I keep coming back to this, the concern about talking about the strategies and what that means, and then revisiting the targets, because we may feel more comfortable making that stretch goal after we understand the impacts of those strategies. And again, as we've discussed, we're going to look at this each year, but can we now kind of say there's minimum and stretch goals? It sounds like that's an option as well. So what I don't want to do is delay this work because we're perseverating on goals right now. I want the work to go forward and then potentially revisit the goals one way or the other. So we could go one way, we could have the stretch goal now and then revisit, or the moderate goal and then revisit. But I'd like to have in the timeline a point at which we're going to revisit it after we talk about the strategies.
Councilmember Marshall.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Shrubnik. I also agree with Councilmember File, and I strongly support the idea of trying to speed things up. Just the sense of urgency and the current situation, which I'm sure many will paint from a different political perspective as a mere anomaly or not attributable to something and it may not reoccur, et cetera. This current heat we're going through right now and the impact it's having on everybody in our environment is just really alarming me. And I was going to ask, Ms. Peachman, are there examples of achieving the goals much faster, like in 10 years or something? Are there examples of at least significant steps towards achieving the goals?
Yeah, we could definitely pull examples from other jurisdictions. I mean, I think California is pretty far ahead of the game. A lot of California's cities are adopting things. I think there are some things that are really hard to control. So for example, your electricity grid getting cleaner over time. We kind of looked at what the state's already doing there, but there are some of these more meta issues that make it a challenge for local jurisdictions to do it on their own. Again, things like promoting EVs or cleaner vehicles, things like that. It's really hard to affect that at the local level. There are definitely strategies to consider there. So yeah, we'd be happy to look into some cities that are doing it right or doing it really well. One thing that we've seen a lot of success with is local governments doing it themselves. So their local government operations going to net zero way for, on a much shorter timeline than the community's emissions. And it kind of is like putting your money where your mouth is. And just really saying it is possible to do it on the small scale and broaden it beyond that. So yeah, if it would be helpful, we could pull some kind of other jurisdictional examples or case studies, if that would be helpful in your decision making.
Councilmember O'Kane.
I just wanted to share that I'm in alignment with Councilmember Srebnick and Councilmember Marshall, and that I think it's important that we get moving now. I think where we're at with the Kenmore proposed is something that's a great place to start, but for staff to be aware that when we're making our proposals, let's aim higher, so that we can certainly surpass what these goals are, give us strategies that we can get there and maybe adjust our targets. But, I would love to see very aggressive proposals to meet and supersede the targets that we have here. So thank you. And thank you everyone who's been involved in putting this together. It's great work. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so I think what we're looking for here is to provide direction to staff in regards to one, changes and updates to the proposed climate action plan, reduction targets, and two, changes and updates to the proposed climate action plan vulnerability assessment. And if we have no changes to the proposed items, then we certainly can approve this two components of the climate action plan and move on. So basically, what does council want to do here? Councilmember O'Kane.
Would this be time to make the motion to approve?
You certainly can.
I'll make the motion to approve.
Is
Second.
there, would Councilmember Srebnick seconded? Is there any further discussion on accepting these two components to our climate action plan? I see none. Will the clerk, there's a motion in front, Councilmember Srebnick.
I would like to have a placeholder in our timeline that demarcates, that we're going to relook at these targets.
Right.
So probably at the end of the calendar year, something like that.
So then we can approve these two to be included and move on with the understanding that there is a timeline, there is a place for us to revisit these targets in this. Mr. Sawyer, is that understood with this?
Yes, that's very clear. So, and I think that the perfect time for that would be at the end of phase 3 when we're looking at the strategies. I'll make a note that we'll bring back up and revisit reduction targets.
Fine. So if there's no further questions, then the motion in front of us is to accept these two components of the climate action plan. And will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember O'Kane?
Yes.
Councilmember File?
Yes.
Councilmember Srebnick?
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Kugler?
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
And that is with the understanding that we have opportunity to look at the targets at a later date. All right. Next item on the agenda is Log Boom Waterfront Access and Viewing Project Bid 21-C 2669 CIP Project Budget Modification and Contract Authorization. Ms. Colazizi.
Hi.
Hi.
Council, can you hear me? Yes?
We can.
Okay, good. Well, thank you. I'm going to share a little bit of information just for the council's benefit as well as the communities. So I'll introduce the topic and then we'll open it up for your comments or questions. The Log Boom Park Waterfront Access and Viewing Project has a long history. It's dating back to the 2005 adopted Log Boom Park Master Plan. That's going back a ways. This project will essentially complete the goals of the park's master plan. Those goals include enhancing the public's ability to access the water and protecting the park's 4 wetlands and restoring the park's shoreline and wetland buffer, which encompasses the entire 3.9 acre park. On May 4th, the city posted the project for bidders after receiving the last of our required permits. The 21C 2669 bid proposal for this project includes constructing 1.5 acres of the park improvements at this existing park, including developing an ADA accessible pathway network, a new picnic shelter and seating area, a small boat rental building, and public art. The project will also improve the existing water access point on Lake Washington for hand-powered boat launching and expand it into a public beach, as well as provide a new shore access point at the western part of the park. Finally, the project will include protection of 1 acre of the on-site wetlands from public access, removal of invasive plant species, on-site riparian and upland plantings of native vegetation, including 30 large conifer trees, 17 large and 64 small deciduous trees, and over thousands, it's within the 1,000, shrubs, as well as improvements to the aquatic habitat. Bids were opened on June 8th, 2021. The construction estimate was $1,552,000. And it was vetted primarily in January and was updated in April. The bid climate changed significantly in the last few months, which led to fewer bids and higher than anticipated bid costs. Contractors are in demand for private construction, and many public projects were delayed due to COVID in 2020 and now are in competition for contracts. There is also a shortage of workers at all skill levels, a shortage of materials, and an increase in material costs. The lowest responsive and responsible bidder, Road Construction Northwest bid, was $2.264 million, which was about $712,000 above our engineer's estimate, or 46%. A 10% construction contingency of $226,400 is also needed for a total contract authorization of $2,490,461. A budget increase of $784,427 would be needed to award the bid and complete the project as scheduled. So staff is recommending revenue, which would include $564,415 from the $3.2 million bond funds, which were allocated for this project. So 29,330 of that was already in 2020 that we would be bringing into 2021. And the remaining is unallocated bond funds for this project of $535,000. We would be allocating park impact fees of $160,000 and $60,000 of King County Trail Levy funds. Staff also recommends council authorize the city manager to execute the contract 21C 2669 with Road Construction Northwest Inc. And complete the project as designed, permitted, and finally as scheduled. this ends the presentation. Thank you.
That was a really good presentation. Any questions? Councilmember Srebnick.
Yeah, just, I mean, of course, I would love to have this done yesterday, but this is a long, long goal of mine and many of us. Do we have any reason to think that if we postponed a few months, the bid climate would change? And actually, do we even have that option at this point, given where we are in the process?
Well, good question. And we definitely thought about that. But delaying does not ensure lower bids. And it doesn't ensure that for several reasons. One, labor costs do change in the middle of the year in July. So we got in on this project under that. And there's a potential that that might increase. And again, materials are in high demand. So, and availability is down. So that's driving, supply and demand is driving costs up. So that wouldn't necessarily change the results of what you've already seen. This particular bidder, we did a review of their previous work. They do have good experience, even though their name is road construction. They have a lot of park experience. And so I think would be an excellent fit for this project.
Thanks, just wanted to explore it.
Any other?
Pardon. Let me also input that delaying would also put our permits at risk, and also our grants that we received. Changing the schedule puts those things at risk. Once you change the project, either in the schedule or in the design, then you have to go back and redesign, which costs money, and then also reanalyze how your how your permits align with that. And also grants want to be done by a certain time. Our timeline is before 2023. And so when you continue to delay, that causes problems.
So I see I have two motions here, but the city attorney has made a magical appearance, meaning something's up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Very intuitive. I was just hoping that if there's any motion from the council, noting that the staff report, in fact, included a history of a bid protest, that the motion include that the city waives any irregularities or informalities as non-material. It was reviewed by my office, determined to be non-material, but because there was in fact a bid protest, state law requires that the city give them 2 days notice prior to executing a contract. They could still go to court. So if we could just again include, or just say the motion includes the waiver of irregularities and informalities as noted by the city attorney.
Madam Clerk, did you get that?
I did. I have a clarifying question to the city attorney. My question is, which motion is this to be tied to? Is this the motion to authorize to execute the contract? Or is this
It's to authorize the contract,
including the waiver of irregularities and informalities as noted?
Not material.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we can make the motion including those stipulations, correct? Okay, so I'm going to phrase it, including stipulations that the clerk has. All right, any further questions? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to authorize the city manager execute contract number 21-C2669 with Road Construction Northwest in the amount of $2,264,055.66 to construct a log boom park waterfront access and viewing project P28, plus a 10% construction contingency of $226,405.57 for a total contract authorization of $2,490,461.33, including stipulations.
So moved, Councilmember File.
Second, Srebnick.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this? Will the clerk please take the roll?
Mayor Baker,
Yes?
Councilmember Srebnick,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Kane,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember File,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember Kugler.
Can you pour me a little?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
And I just asked you nicely.
Councilmember O'Kane? Question?
No question. I'm sorry. My mute wasn't on.
Okay. So the chair will now entertain a motion to approve an increase of $784,427. No, excuse me. Is that 700? Yeah, $784,427 in the 2021-2026 capital improvement program for project P28 Log Boom Park Waterfront Access and Viewing Project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on this one? Hearing none, will the clerk please take the roll?
Councilmember Kugler,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember File,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Kane,
Yes.
Councilmember Srebnick,
Yes.
and Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item on the agenda is to adopt ordinance number 21-0526, adopting the capital improvement plan. That would be presented by our Finance and Administration Director, Leticia Salcido.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes?
let me share my screen.
We see it.
Okay, good. Okay. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. Welcome to the first review of the City of Kenmore's capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan was adopted on October 12 of 2020 for $87 million, $87.4 million, and it included projects for parks, transportation, surface water management, and city facilities. Tonight's presentation will be reviewing revisions made to 6 projects within parks, transportation, as well as a look at potential debt service for the project in city facilities, and then 1 new project in transportation. The updated capital improvement plan is totals $98.1 million. And it looks like this. The capital improvement projects in the various categories for park, in total, we have $98.1 million allocated between parks, transportation, surface water, and city facilities. For parks, the allocation in the CIP is $10.9 million, and it includes 9 projects. For transportation, we have 14 projects at a total, with a total allocation of $65.5 million. Surface water is $8.2 million, 9 projects, and city facilities, it totals $13.4 million. It's 1 project and the respective debt service on a loan to fund that project. With regards to the Parks Capital Improvement Project, as mentioned before, the total allocation for the various projects, and this is the listing of those projects, P1, P18, 18A, and so on, totals $10.9 million. And the revisions within this category is under P27, which is, and I'm gonna try to, it's Tawadi's Landing Waterfront, as well as P28, which is the Log Boom Park. The Log Boom Park is the project that was just discussed. Basically, this is a project in the original CIP. It had a total allocation of $2.9 million with to be financed from the various bonds, impact, park levies, and so on. As mentioned before, the total allocation at the time that the bonds were issued was $3.2 million, and of which 564,000 was thought at that point in time was not going to be used. After the bid was opened, now it turns out we'll be using those funds, the 564,000 from bond proceeds, as well as impact fees in the amount of 160,000 and park levies fees of 60,000. So what was just presented to you under the Log Boom Park presentation has been incorporated into the CIP program plan. The other project, P27, is a project that has been revised. It includes, the net increase is only 11,000. But what happened in this project is we are increasing the grant proceeds by 855,000, which has allowed for a reduction in the amount allocated from other city funds, such as Impact, Swamp, Creek Basin Fund, the Public Art Fund, and bond proceeds to be reduced as a result of the increase in grant proceeds. In total, we have $10.9 million, again, with the major projects being P27 and P28, Log Boom Park, and Tawadi Landing Waterfront. This is the allocation for the parks projects throughout the years 2021 through 2026. The top portion corresponds to the various projects within parks. And then the bottom portion is the various funding sources for those projects. For example, in 2021, we have $6.1 million, $2.1 million for 2022, with the major projects being, again, P27 and P28. For transportation, we have four projects that have been updated, revised. T27, the sidewalk gaps, T44, 61st Avenue sidewalk replacement project. T51 is a new project, and then we have T41. With T27 for sidewalk gaps, we have an increase of 420,000 for sidewalk gaps from real estate REIT, which is your real estate excise tax. The 420,000 increase in this project corresponds to a reduction within the T44 project. As a result, again, an increase in grants in the amount of, let me see, T44, 4.9 million, allowing for a reduction in other city funds. Again, T44, 61st Avenue, an increase, a net increase of $4.4 million, 4.9 million being grant funds, and then a reduction in the real estate excise tax of 420,000, which allowed us to increase the amount for sidewalk gaps and T27. We have T51, which is the Burke-Gilman Trail, wayfinding and connectivity, a new project. in the amount of $306,000. The revenue source for that project being a new grant from the Washington State Department of Transportation. And then for T41, the Juanita Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety, that's only a shift of funds, 200,000 from REIT from impact to REIT. So basically, the major projects with changes, the project with major changes are the T44, the 61st Avenue for an increase of $4.4 million, and then the sidewalk gaps for $420,000, and then $306,000 for the new project T51, the Burke-Gilman Trail. Again, this is the allocation of the various projects and the various allocations for those projects within the transportation fund, with the major projects in 21 and 22 being the pedestrian preservation, $1.1 million, and then the Juanita, the T41 project for 2021 and 2022, an allocation of $10.3 million, and then $11.9 million for the T44 project, which is the 68th Avenue. Also meriting mention, excuse me, is the Sammie Bridge with $26.7 million within the year of 2021 and 2022. With regards to the surface water fund, this one had no changes other than a decrease in the allocation from surface water to this one is SW44 for the 61st Avenue sidewalk, a decrease of $45,000 as a result of the increase in grants to cover that other project. We have for surface water, no changes for the projects, and we have the allocations again here for the various projects throughout the years, totaling $8.2 million. Now for the city facility, this project in the original CIP program had an allocation of $6.5 million. This new CIP reflects an increase in that amount to reflect purchase of land as well as the construction of the facilities. The increase is $10 million, from $6.5 million to $10 million, funded by Surface Water Management Fund, Street Fund, Transportation Benefit District Fund, and the General Fund. The funding source for this project in the original CIP was a note. I have moved forward and obtained a quote, a research as to what the cost would be if we went with the public market and if we issued bonds for this project. At this point in time, that would be a 19-year bond issuance, assuming a 2.09% true interest cost, a proceeds of almost $10.1 million for the project, and a par, the amount that the city would be paying of $8.5 million. And the difference in those is the premium that the investors are willing to pay for in this type of interest rate scenario. The debt service would be approximately $639,000 for annually, and then the debt service to be paid by the above mentioned funds of surface water, streets, general fund. Other loan options are being researched, such as a loan from the state, and going also funding through our local bank. At this point in time, this is what it would cost the city if we were to go out and issue bonds and obtain our funding through the capital markets. And this is reflecting the allocation for the both the purchase of the land as well as the construction, total cost of $10 million. And then the 3.3 million would be the debt service throughout the years from 2021 through 2026. At the bottom portion reflects the funding sources, again, the various city funds, and all paying towards the debt service of either the bonds or the note or the loan proceeds for this endeavor. The total project expenditures is $98.1 million, again allocated between these categories of parks, transportation, surface water, and city facility. The revenue sources include the following: state, federal, and other grants account for 49%. That would be this category right here with the state grants, federal grants here, and then other grants in this other category, 8.6. Between grants in total would be approximately 49% of the total amount needed for all of these projects, with the rest of it being impact fees, real estate excise tax. Local is your general fund, your surface water, your strategic opportunity funds, and that's 11 million, 12%. Your 2019 water and wastewater bonds, another $12 million, which would be 13%. With regards to revenues for all of the projects in total, it is $98.1 million. And the green portion reflects the revenues contributing to the parks projects. The middle portion with the orange are the revenues for the transportation. Gray is the Sammie Bridge, surface water, and then your public facilities for a total of $98.1 million. Now, how does that reflect? Your CIP reflects council's priorities for the city. How does it do that? One of the council priorities is to implement the walkways and waterway projects, and that is being accomplished. That is being met by the Log Boom Park at $3.4 million in the CIP plan. The landing waterfront, Tawadi's landing waterfront, $6.4 million. The Juanita Drive pedestrian bike safety program, $10.3 million in the CIP plan. 68th Avenue pedestrian and bicycle safety, $12 million. Another goal, council goal for the city of Canmore is to continue to implement a parks capital improvement plan. And in the CIP, we have allocated 10.9 million towards parks. City goal, city council priority to focus on and emphasize multimodal transportation safety with focus on pedestrian, bicycle, and other means of transportation. The CIP has allocated $65.6 million for transportation projects, which include 24.8 million for pedestrian and bicycle safety improvements, an allocation of 7 million for sidewalk programs, 3 million for pavement preservation, the Sammamish River, $27.7 million, and $2 million for signs and lighting on SR 522. Your goal, your priority of economic development, advance public access to water, walkable downtown, and promote the image of Canmore is being met by various of the projects within the CIP program. All in all, your CIP reflects the priorities that the city has as a goal for the city of Canmore. Hello?
All right. Do we have any questions on the on the revisions to the 2021-2026 CIP? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt ordinance number 21-056, amending the 2021 to 2026 capital improvement program for parks, transportation, surface water, and city facility.
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, the clerk please take the roll.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember Kugler,
Yes.
Councilmember File,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Kane.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, next item on the agenda is to adopt ordinance number 21-0527, accepting the ARPA funds and establishing the new ARPA Physical Recovery Fund presented by Finance and Administration Director Leticia Saucedo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The American Rescue Plan, the Act of 2021, was signed into law on March 11 of 2021 as part of the COVID-19 stimulus package to distribute aid and assist in the recovery from budgetary, economic, and financial impact of the pandemic. The city of Kenmore is projected to receive approximately $6.4 million for coronavirus local fiscal recovery funds from ARPA, with a first distribution to be on or about July of 2021 in the amount of $3.2 million. The second distribution is expected in 2022. The funds received should be obligated by December 31st of 2021 and spent completely by December of 2026. This ordinance authorizes the establishment of the ARPA Fiscal Recovery Fund. It's a special revenue fund to account for the funds, separate accountability of the revenues and expenditures of this federal award. It authorizes the city manager to apply and accept and deposit funds of the ARPA and related grant program funds. The interim final rule, U.S. Treasury outlines the eligible expenditures, and the recommendation of the city manager is to allocate $1 million for direct cash assistance to low-income residents, and an allocation for salaries and benefits estimated at $150,000 for 2021 and $250,000 for 2022 for one temporary full-time position, limited term, at the assistant city manager salary range to manage the ARPA fund projects, activities, contracts, documentation, and reporting, and to seek and apply for other ARPA-related funding. The budget amendments for this ordinance will be presented in the fall to reconfirm appropriation and expenditures of eligible under ARPA. Thank you.
You're muted, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Marshall.
No, I had no comment. Thanks.
All right. Any questions? Hearing none, the chair will entertain a motion to adopt ordinance 21-0527, accepting the ARPA funds and establishing the new ARPA Physical Recovery Fund presented. Is there a motion?
So moved. Councilmember File.
Second.
Second.
All right. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Clerk, please take the roll.
Councilmember Kugler,
Yes.
Councilmember Marshall,
Yes.
Councilmember Shrubnik,
Yes.
Councilmember File,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Herbig,
Yes.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember O'Kane.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
All right, we're going to jump a little bit because we have a hard stop here with Mrs. Helder. So, Mr. City Manager? Redistricting discussion with Brianna Murray and Shelley Helder of Gordon Thomas Honeywell.
Yes, I'm looking to see if she is being promoted in. Do we see her? Oh, there she is. Yeah. Yeah, so with the completion of the census that happens every 10 years, what also follows is potential redistricting, both at the congressional level and at the state legislative district level. And several of you asked for some information on that. So we invited Shelley Helder, which is from Gordon Thomas Honeywell, to come and speak to us on the topic and give you some information and have you ask questions. Shelley, take it away.
Great. Good evening, Council. I am Shelley Helder, your Government Affairs Consultant. And as Rob just said, I'm just going to provide some information about the redistricting process, and then I will do my best to answer any questions that you may have. And so I'm just going to go over quickly the what, the when, the how, and then offer a few comments that pertain to Penn more specifically. So as Rob said, the redistricting process takes place every 10 years, and that follows the census. And that's to account for the disproportionate population growth in different parts of the state. The redistricting commission includes 5 commissioners. 1 commissioner is appointed by the leadership from each of the 4 major caucuses in the state legislature. And then those 4 commissioners collectively select the 5th commissioner, who is a non-voting member and kind of is the leader and facilitator of the group. The 5 commissioners this year are, or I guess for this 10-year cycle, are Brady Walkinshaw, Joe Fain, April Sims, Paul Graves, and Sarah Augustine. And Sarah is the 5th non-voting member that the 4 appointed commissioners selected. For more information about any of the commissioners, the redistricting.wa.gov website has their bios if anyone's interested. The state statute that governs the redistricting process gives some guidelines that the commissioners are required to follow when redrawing the district boundaries. The statute lists several things, and so I'm just going to really summarize them succinctly here for you this evening. One of the considerations that they have to take into account is population, of course. So the population of each district needs to be as nearly equal as possible. And in past redistricting processes, the population from the greatest to the least, it's only been a difference of 1%. So they've accomplished that in the past. Districts are supposed to be contiguous, compact, and convenient. And that's convenience for the legislators that are representing those districts, as well as convenient for constituents to have access to their representatives. The legislative districts and congressional districts are supposed to preserve communities of interest, and that is not a defined term in statute. That's something that really is up to the commissioners to apply. In the past, that's been cities and school districts. This commission is actually putting quite a bit of effort and thought into what communities of interest may be now in 2021. Some of the new communities of interest that are being proposed are tribal lands, communities that speak the same language or have a similar racial background. So that's a little bit about communities of interest. The next item that they're supposed to consider is that it be a fair and effective representation to encourage electoral competition. I guess another way of putting that is that it would be a competitively drawn district. And then lastly, the district does not favor or disfavor any political party, incumbent, or candidate. So that's a little bit about the what for the redistricting process. When, census data was supposed to be available from the federal government in April, but it won't be available until mid to late August. And recently, I guess in recent past, Washington State has updated the statute to say that the new district map must be agreed to by November 15th. And that agreement means that at least 3 of the 4 voting commissioners have to approve the new boundaries. And then once those are approved, the new districts will take effect for the 2022 primary elections. In the event that 3 of the 4 commissioners are not able to come to an agreement by November 15th, it's then up to the Supreme Court to make that decision. So that's the when, that's a little bit of the timeline that we're looking at. The how. I mentioned it already, the redistricting website, redistricting.wa.gov, is a really excellent resource. You can tell comparing the redistricting website from 10 years ago to now, the advancements in technology and resources and tools. One of them being the option for anyone in Washington to use an online tool and to draw the district boundaries for all 49 districts in Washington. And if you so choose to draw those district boundaries, you are able to submit them. The commissioners can see who's drawn boundaries in which ways and take that into consideration. So that's one tool. That tool is actually supposed to be launched today, so it should be up and running, if not today, I'm sure soon. The other ways, how, meaning how to engage in the process. Also on the redistricting website, you can register for email updates, and those give you information about the upcoming public hearing meetings. They've broken down the first set of public input sessions based on congressional district, but they will be continuing to have meetings from now until mid-September timeframe. And they will be combining congressional districts. So for example, Congressional District 1 and 3 will be a meeting, and anyone who lives or would like to comment on maps or districts within that area would be able to. And then the last way of how you can engage is you can submit written testimony to the commissioners if you have any comments that you would like to share with them, but maybe you aren't able to log on during the relevant public meeting, or you just don't feel comfortable doing that. So they've made it very accessible for to hear from the public, and at least the information that I've been receiving from the commissioners is that they are reading those comments and they are taking them into consideration and are grateful for the people who are taking the time to provide them with their opinions. As I mentioned, the census data is not officially released yet. It won't be released until mid to late August. Right now, the commission is simply holding public meetings to get input, but there is some preliminary data that has been developed by Washington State's Office of Financial Management. And so there are some beginning estimates on which districts need to shrink or grow relative to the population growth in the other parts of the state. So generally speaking, there has been more growth in the central Puget Sound, in Southwest Washington, and in the Tri-Cities. And those 3 areas in particular, more so than other parts of the state. There's also been more growth in incorporated areas versus unincorporated areas, and more growth in suburban communities versus the growth in the bigger cities such as Seattle and Tacoma. Specific to the 46th legislative district, which is the district that Kenmore falls in, the preliminary data, and again, it's preliminary, so this could change when the official numbers are released in August. But the preliminary data shows that the 46th district has grown relatively more than the rest of the state, meaning that the district would need to shrink geographically in order to ensure equal representation amongst all legislative districts. So that's a lot of information, and I think I would just, since I do have a little bit of time with you tonight, I think I would just like to share my recommendation for the city. If there is something that as a city you are wanting to weigh in on, I think that those public hearing opportunities that they're hosting or written comment is a very useful and effective way to weigh in. What I've been hearing from the commissioners is that the comments that they are finding most helpful is when communities are expressing concern or suggestions on how their legislative districts or congressional districts are not currently adequately representing their citizens or their community. So I think that's something to take into consideration. And then I think just the last thing that I'll mention before pausing for any questions is the preliminary maps that the commission is going to begin drawing. They said they will plan to release them in mid-September. And so there will be an opportunity to comment on the preliminary maps once they are released. So this initial round of public input is kind of more of the opportunity to comment on, hey, this is what is or isn't working based on the historical districts. Once the preliminary maps are released in September, that'll then be the opportunity to say, this is what we do or don't think works for these preliminary maps. So I guess that's the long and short of the redistricting process. I will stop there. I know you guys have already had a full agenda, and I'm sure anxious to get to other items. So happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. So I would just want to be clear. It would be helpful if we had an interest as a council to sign on to a letter of support to possibly be to consider staying within the 46, or at least to propose staying within the 46 LD. For the most part, I won't speak for all of our council, but I know I'm particularly very happy with the representation our fine Senator Frocht, Representative Jerry Paulette, and Representative Valdez have provided our Kenmore community over the years. And I would certainly hate to see us lose their great representation or to slide into another district. So what I would like to know is, would it be helpful for our council to sign on to a letter of support?
Good question. Yeah, thank you for asking that, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify one thing that I said. What I've been hearing from the redistricting commissioners is the feedback that they have been looking for and have found most helpful is when communities feel that their current district boundaries do not represent them well. So if there is a problem or a challenge with the existing boundary lines, that is when they're finding that feedback very helpful. If there is not a problem, if you're really satisfied with your existing boundaries, I'm sure that they would be happy to hear that. It's just what I've heard from them is that that's not as relevant or as helpful of information when they're drawing boundaries as it is if, say, your city was cut in half, and that's been very difficult for you, given that you have half your city in one district and half in another. I think Councilmember File, you make a great point that the city of Kenmore has been very well represented by the 46th district. And one thing to note is that the redistricting process does not, just by statute, it is not allowed to take into consideration parties or incumbents. And so although the city has been well represented by your current senator and representatives, that's not what is being considered in the redistricting process. It's purely the district boundaries. And so things like, a city being split in half, or, a really small portion of the city not being part of the legislative district that the rest of the city is in, and that making it difficult to adequately represent all of the city's interests. Things like that are the concerns that they're wanting to hear at this time. And so, of course, if the council feels that there is some type of challenge with current representation, I think a letter makes sense. But aside from that, I'm not sure that a letter is at this point necessary.
Thank you. So just to clarify, we should wait till we see the proposed boundary lines.
That would be my recommendation. Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you so much.
All right. Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you, Shelley.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate the information. I guess, yep, that's great. Then let's go back. Mr. City Manager, I'm not trying to steal your thunder, but the Kenmore Light Festival event presented by Volunteer Event Supervisor, Miss Stephanie Brown.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Let me share my screen here. Let's see. Okay. I am speaking to you to provide a brief update of the Kenmore Light Festival. During the 2021 City Council retreat, the topic of the city's role in holiday events and cultural activities was brought up. The consensus of the discussion was it's not appropriate for the city to host religious-focused events at City Hall. It is, however, acceptable for nonprofit community groups to reserve space and host religious-themed events at locations other than City Hall, such as the Hangar and Town Square. The action item from the council retreat is to change the annual tree lighting festival to the Kenmore Light Festival, an inclusive celebration that gives the community an opportunity to gather. The Kenmore Light Festival will run December 1st to December 31st. The festival will include a winter porch light parade, luminary walk, and food drive. We will also continue to have lights on the trees along Northeast 181st Street and have additional lights in Town Square. We will partner with the City of Bothell and other surrounding cities on the winter porch light parade. Community members will participate by expressing themselves through light displays. Individuals will enter to participate, and we will create a virtual map of all the light displays in the region. We will have different categories and prizes. Each participating city will have separate first, second, third place prizes, so the cities are not competing against each other. Event participation and promotion for the Winter Porch Light Parade will be in all participating communities, which will bring more people to Kenmore. We will have lights on the trees in Kenmore Town Square and a photo opportunity which will be highlighted on the virtual map. We look forward to partnering with other cities on this event and sharing the joy of light with the community throughout the month of December. Depending on the pandemic public health restrictions, we would like to offer an on-site gathering for the Kenmore community. We plan to do a luminary walk on December 4th. The location of the event and time is still being determined. It will be a free and family-friendly event. Attendees will be encouraged to bring canned goods as part of our community food drive. We will continue to partner with the Kenmore Food Bank on a food drive starting in November and going through December. Also, throughout the month of December, we will be sharing information about Target Zero through our social media channels and provide free Target Zero swag at City Hall. Thank you for the opportunity to provide a report on the Kenmore Light Festival.
Questions? Any questions? Seeing none. All right, Mr. City Manager. Not here, so.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
Councilmember Shrevenick has her hand raised.
Councilmember Shrevenick.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a lot of fun. Particularly, of course, I think, I love the luminary idea, and we had done that in conjunction with the Christmas ships, which was particularly fun as well. And again, that's kind of the public and private working together. And on that note, I really appreciate this and kind of the separation of the city per se. And I'm wondering if we've reached out to the businesses to potentially sponsor some of the things that are missing that we used to do. It's just a thought. The tree and Santa pictures and things like that that people liked. So that's one question. And then the other two are around kind of the community groups that used to perform at City Hall. And then the third question is around the, I think it's a craft market that was at the hangar. So are any of those a possibility?
To answer question number one, yes, that we have reached out to some businesses, and so that is in progress to encourage businesses to participate in the Winter Porch Light Parade and do some of those activities that we have seen in years past. Also, we will encourage, nonprofit organizations to continue some of the traditions as well. And then in terms of music, with the Luminary Walk, we hope to provide some music and include the community in that way. And what was your question for number 3?
The craft market in the hangar?
Okay, yeah, that's definitely something we can look into, so.
Super, thanks. Love this work.
All right. I think now we can move to returning to council chambers update by our city clerk.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I've also asked our attorney, Don Rayton, to join me here, and Shelley Helder has graciously agreed to stay on for just a little bit longer in case she has an inside scoop that she wants to share with us. And to be very cognizant of her time, I think we might just start with her. And the question at hand is, what is the current status of the emergency order and how it pertains to the OPMA and the proclamation to which that's tied? Shelley, can you tell us what you know and what you predict might happen in the near future?
Of course. Yeah, I can definitely share what I know, and I don't think my prediction is going to be any more insightful than any of your predictions. Of course, everyone knows that June 30th is the date that the state is planning to reopen. What that means for public meetings, particularly for the City Council, there are 2 paths for how the state can manage the OPMA. First, they could repeal the governor's emergency proclamation, which impacts OPMA, or they could maintain the governor's emergency proclamation, and that it would potentially stay in place until the COVID-19 emergency is officially declared over. There are kind of challenges and questions that would impact cities' ability to conduct meetings either way. So if the governor does decide to repeal the emergency proclamation or declares an end to the COVID-19 emergency on June 30th, cities would still be required to resume in-person public meetings under the OPMA. It means that a city would need to provide an in-person location for each meeting where members of the public could attend, could hear the proceedings, and participate. And then if a city chooses to, they could continue to provide remote access. Then the other option is if the governor chooses to maintain the emergency proclamation on public meetings, cities would need to continue to provide remote access to those meetings. So that's a very abbreviated version of kind of the details of what could or couldn't happen. Like I said, at this point, my best guess is as good as yours. I would say it's probably 50-50.
Thank you very much, Shelley. So to build a little bit on that, the last time we actually talked about this was at the retreat, and where we left off was that the council had a very collective yearning to keep a virtual component to the meeting, and primarily because it's looking through a DEI lens, it removes a lot of barriers for people who would otherwise be troubled by having to physically move to a certain location. It's just a lot more convenient for many people. And in fact, I think we've seen overwhelmingly that our public comments have been pretty steady and consistent, and the numbers in some cases are greater than what we could have predicted in a non-pandemic, non-virtual environment. So what we've done since the retreat is we've attempted to test option number 3 on your memo, which is essentially to hold a physical meeting, a physical space, and integrate a virtual public comment component to that meeting. Mayor Baker met with us last Friday, and we sort of tried a mock meeting on Versailles. I think it went relatively well, and I think we're going to try to move in that direction. I want to touch on our staff recommendation and give you a couple of thoughts as you consider what you might want to do collectively, given whatever legal framework we can work within. The staff recommend that you continue virtual meetings for a little longer. It gives us more time to work out the kinks. It gives us a little bit of time to work in the physical space. It's a new space with some enhancements. And there's just some operational tasks that we need to complete to prep the area. The other thing that we need to do is we need to train some internal staff on how to use the new council chambers interface, and that's very important to me. We have people stepping into new roles. The Planning Commission clerk is brand new, and I want to make sure that everyone feels very confident that these go smoothly. And it seems like, from my perspective, if we're going to move as a collective of the council, my recommendation is that we move as a unit, either to stay virtually or as a unit to move in person. And we can do that in a soft start kind of phase, but I do not suggest that we break that up, meaning I don't recommend that we have a hybrid option for half of the council meeting out of the council chambers and suppose another half virtually. One of the reasons is sort of at the granular microscope level. As your clerk, I think of 7 elements that kind of make a really successful meeting. The public needs to be able to hear and see the council. The council needs to be able to hear and see the public during testimony. The presiding officer has to clearly see all the council members and presenters. The council members have to clearly see and hear each other. The council members have to see the projected materials, and the clerk has to be able to effectively manage the council chambers, the live streaming component, and any additional Zoom interface. So if we were to fragment that too much or add too many mediums, some of those elements get jeopardized pretty quickly. So as we think about these things and offer suggestions, I just want you to know that that's where I'm coming from as your clerk. So right now, it's not like anything is changing. We're at the mercy of what the governor's going to do next. But I want you to know that we're trying hard to get prepared and anticipate what we might do and plan for that.
Any questions? Yes, Deputy Mayor.
Not a question so much as a comment. I appreciate the staff recommendation and the work being put in by the clerk and everybody to really facilitate what we discussed at the retreat of allowing continued public virtual public comment, because I think that's the only good that's come from the pandemic, is it's been a lot easier for the public to actually interface with us when they don't have to come down to City Hall. And we saw the same thing in the state legislature, and we're seeing the same thing in a lot of other places. It's a lot easier for folks to jump on Zoom where they're making dinner and make sure their voice is heard. And I know that we make better decisions when we hear from folks. So I'm really hopeful that that part will get ironed out, and I'm looking forward to it. And I appreciate all the work that is being put into that right now.
Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, I also want to echo the same sentiment. And I also want to voice that there are some differences amongst our council members and families. Some of our members have older families. Some of them have younger children within the families. And those children don't have the opportunity to have vaccine yet. So I'm thinking about impactors that could impact our council members and their families. And I think there should be some bandwidth for option and opportunity to ensure that we're not jeopardizing anyone else's safety. With that being said, I'm happy to have a slow roll in to coming back together and taking it slow. I appreciate your recommendations. And I don't want to speak for any other council members, but I really appreciate the DEI scope of looking at inclusion. Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Kugler.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. City Clerk, thank you so much for the work and training and the thought that you've put in to thinking about how we might resume in-person meetings. I agree with everything that you proposed, and especially keeping online citizen comments. Since we're on this topic of keeping meetings virtual, I wondered if I could share some feedback that I've heard from residents, and that is they're wondering if they can see participants' names. So other citizens who are on our current meetings, if we continue to keep them online, participants are wondering if they can see other participants' names, because currently I think only council can see that. And I know this is going to be challenging, but if it's possible for council members to Zoom in or participate virtually in the future, I think this might speak to what council member File was bringing up. I know that as part of our rules, we can call in a couple times a year, and I just think that being able to see people on the screen adds a much different element. As you said, it's one of those 7 things that you consider. So if it's possible technically, I think that would be great. And then while this isn't an official meeting, I know that there's been requests from residents for us to keep our coffees with council online indefinitely. And we may add something in person, but I'm hoping at a later time, maybe we could talk about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I just did want to make sure that both Don and Rob had an opportunity to make any comments. As you know, I'm still fairly new to the city, and they certainly have a more eagle perspective on this than I do, and they've seen you and worked with you in the council chambers. I've yet to have a meeting with you in that space. So I want to make sure that if I'm missing something or there's some more context, that they had a chance to chime in.
Well, our city attorney has made her appearance again, so we know something's up.
Nothing's up. I actually just wanted to make a comment. I thought this was a very thorough presentation. I really have nothing to add except to note that everything could change on June 30th. And so that could be an interesting conversation. But for tonight, no, I have nothing to add. Thank you.
All right. Mr. City Manager, you're going to be doing a heat wave update, but if you have any comments from the city clerk.
No, she covered it really well.
You did.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Yeah, today's historic day, highest recorded temperature ever in the Puget Sound area history since they started recording temperatures in 1894. Really put an exclamation point on the climate action plan presentation. We timed it that way. We knew that this was going to be 3 weeks ago when we put this on the agenda, we knew today was going to be the hottest. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, I'm really pleased with the community and my coworkers for stepping up. You know, we had 3 cooling stations here in the city. My coworkers came in over the weekend. Nancy Owsley was acting city manager while I was out, and she had the lead on that. She put that together quite nicely with the help of Richard Sawyer and Sammie Roeun and Jim Garza and others. So it was really great to see coworkers come in on the weekend to make that happen yesterday. And then North Shore Utility District had a cooling center today, and then North Lake Lutheran Church has had a cooling center as well. So it's been great to see options provided for our community. We've also wanted to keep our coworkers safe. Today, our field workers, the maintenance workers, they came in extra early today, and then they were kept inside once the temperatures started getting a little too hot. So, but anyway, overall pleased with how the community's responded to this and how my coworkers have responded to this. But it's only going to be 91, 93 tomorrow only. But we'll still keep an eye on it, and then we'll be freezing to death at 84 degrees on Wednesday. So can I move on to the next topic, Your Honor?
Yes, please.
So the AWC, Association of Washington Cities Conference, was last week and was held online. And at that conference, we were presented the Municipal Excellence Award. Here it is. And that was for our financial sustainability plan that you adopted last year. And a lot of work went into that. I want to thank the advisory committee of Kenmore residents that did such an awesome job. Our consultants, Jim Reed and Steve Toller of Management Partners, and my coworkers and everybody that just worked so hard to make that happen. And last but not least, you all with your leadership and vision and support on that. And so it's great that we have a financial sustainability plan through 2028. And it's great that we got recognized for it on a statewide level. Did anybody here go to that presentation where we were presented the award? No? Uh-oh. Well, we got the award and it was mailed to me, and this just arrived in the mail, I think, on Friday. But anyway, great work by everybody, and it was fun to see that. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you. We've done quite well with staff's efforts over the years and receiving recognition from AWC.
Yeah.
You guys do a tremendous job, and it's much appreciated.
Yeah, that's the 6th AWC Municipal Achievement Award we've received since 2013. And we have these on our wall in the lobby, and so we'll put it on there with the other 5. And Nancy said we're starting to run out of wall space. So
don't forget the governor's awards too.
Yeah, we've received the Puget Sound Regional Council Award, the Governor's Smart Communities, all those awards. But the 6 I'm talking about are just the AWC Municipal Awards.
All right. Council member comments. Let's start with Melanie O'Kane. Councilmember O'Kane.
I don't have any comments today. I just want to thank everyone for all the hard work they put into everything that came before us today. But anyway, thank you for bearing with me with my migraine and lights out throughout the meeting. Hope that it's getting better. But anyway, I just want to say thank you for bearing with me without my screen time as I normally would have. So thank you.
All right, thank you. And I hope you get better soon here. Councilmember Marshall.
Thanks to the staff and our community partners for stepping up with those cooling centers. That was amazing. It balances out the absolutely disheartening, upending nature of this heat with at least, hey, we've come forward, we're working out together and we're getting it done. That's great. A couple of great ideas I saw from the city of Kent, maybe for future consideration, was putting out sprinklers in public parks for kids. Maybe Rhodey Park might be a place for that. and or possibly the hangar. And then I just wanted to highlight that I'm interested when we're going to be talking at our future meeting on the asphalt plant, whether or not we should look into measurements of emissions, not on the property, but in affected areas or potentially affected areas, and how much that might cost. So just want to let everyone know that's something I'm interested in coming up. Thanks for a great meeting tonight.
Councilmember Kugler.
We covered a lot of really great business today. And I just wanted to share a comment. This is probably thanks to the past council I had a chance to tour Camp Unity with Deputy Mayor Herbig, and we were asking about city fees and how challenging or easy it is for Camp Unity to find different locations to set up. And they were saying specifically that Kenmore is a very good partner in this respect. We don't, some cities, I guess their fees are so cost prohibitive that they cannot set up in those cities. And so I think we should be cognizant of that and take pride in the fact that we're walking the talk and supporting our residents, and just wanted to share that feedback.
Thank you. Councilmember Srebnick.
Yeah, I have a thank you to staff for stepping up to do the cooling centers. That's fantastic. And I think it really helps build cohesion and care for each other, which I think is part of what we do as a city. I want to thank, I also am looking forward to the briefing along with Councilmember Marshall and have many questions on the asphalt plant. And last, I just want to thank our public. We had over 1,500 people fill out the climate action survey. And that's tremendous for a city of our size. And it shows the interest in this topic, the concern about this topic, and it couldn't be more timely. So I just want to thank everybody.
Councilmember File.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. I also want to thank our city staff for setting up the cooling centers and working with our community partners to add additional community cooling stations. In the future, I hope that we can build off of our relationship with nonprofit partners and hopefully enhance a building site with air conditioning or misting stations to expand our network for the future. Misting stations are also utilized in hotter cities to help cool down the public. It does a good job without too much heavy water impact. Very, very successful in areas like California, Nevada, Palm Springs, Arizona. I also would like to reflect back to our last meeting we had. We had a number of young speakers come before us and talk about what pride means to them and inclusion. And I want them to know that we did hear them. These kids raised some really important points about gender neutral bathrooms. Our town square does not have a gender neutral bathroom and is a public government building, and most government buildings do have at least a family bathroom or a gender neutral bathroom in addition. Does our city hall also not have such an addition? And these would be good upgrades. Additionally, when we have parks in the future that are developed family bathrooms provide a greater service to our diverse families, and who cares for our families when we are at work. So that being considered, I'd like to see us expand into this area and be more inclusive with our building and our code. And I would like to touch upon our Zoom meetings real quickly. One of the things I'm hearing from our community is that the clock is nice and big and ginormous, and it's white and blinding. I think it could be a little bit more comfortable for people if we reduce the size of that appearance. And it'd be nice to see the council and the speaker who's speaking all together. I don't know that we need to have a larger clock covering the entire screen. And lastly, I have heard through the grapevine that our Assistant City Manager, Nancy Owsley, celebrated her 13th year with the City of Kenmore. Is that not so, Mr. City Manager Rob Carlinzy?
I think that is the case. I think it was on the 25th of June.
Well, in that case, I
think 14 years maybe.
we should congratulate her and celebrate her for her many years of service to our community. So thank you. With that being said, I'm just going to wrap it up and say thank you all.
Deputy Mayor.
Last Thursday, I represented the city at a Sound Transit meeting where I gave testimony in support of keeping both 522 and 405 BRT on schedule. And I was joined by many other of our colleagues from Bothell and Kirkland and Shoreline and Lake Forest Park making the same or similar asks. There's still a lot of work that's going to be done on that front. And it'll be interesting to see how things progress, but I think we had a good showing, and my fingers are crossed that 522 BRT will stay on schedule, or at least not be delayed more than 2 years at this point. So fingers crossed, we'll see how things go.
Yeah, I think that we need to stay together as a group and perhaps write a letter, because I'm starting to get correspondence now from the south and from the north wanting to get their projects in the front of the line, or certainly further up than they are. And I don't want that to be at the expense of them pushing 522 behind. So I think that we need to write a letter in appreciation of where the project is and stress the early wins and everything that was promised to them. So we can't drop the ball at this point in the game. It's too meaningful to let it go. I think those of us who have been around and remember 522 the way it was a number of years ago, before there were sidewalks, before there were bus lanes in our city, when that all changed, there was a number of us that were very concerned with the weeds and everything that were growing in the planting strips, in the medians and everything else. Well, we did a lot of complaining, and I was very vocal. I got to tell you, this maintenance crew of ours is just outstanding. They really, really are. It used to be a chore when we were in with Lake Forest Park to get any sort of weeding in the planting strips or the medians. I've seen them out there. I'm telling you, you're not going to find better looking planting strips now or medians. This group that we have is just done a beautiful job in making our city more attractive. And Mr. City Manager, I sure hope you convey this, because I truly mean it. They have done one heck of a good job. If there is nothing further to come before us, we're adjourned. Bye-bye, everybody.
Good evening.
Night.
Night.